Okay. Hey guys. Hey, good evening everybody. This is Tech Thursdays episode 63. We're going to be going over the week. This was probably the most interesting Computex, although a lot of tech press say that it was kind of boring. I don't think it was boring at all. I think this one was very different, and the fact that it was jam-packed and there was a lot of people there in general compared to the previous years says a lot. And there was a huge show. So there was a lot of press conferences. I took some notes, so we're going to kind of go over the agenda for the discussion this evening. So I wrote down a few things here. We got to talk about Qualcomm, AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, and then everybody else. Everyone else. That's kind of four categories. Well, I mean, we can also talk about Asus. Asus was also, they had their own. Acer had one. We might talk about them. I don't normally talk about Acer on this channel, but they were there. And we're going to talk about some of the key themes. The key themes of Computex 2024. Number one, everybody knows what number one is. AI. Number two, efficiency. Specifically, power efficiency. Power efficiency was another really big underlying theme that if you were actually at the event, you would not have been constantly bombarded. So, for the people that were not in person, you guys probably thought that it was just about AI. AI this, AI that. Everybody's press conference said AI at least like a dozen times or more. But there was also the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more... There was also a lot of that stuff. So, but that's not... that kind of goes in hand with some of these here. New memory standard. Cam 2. We're going to talk about Cam 2. Cam 2, I'll just put that by itself. That's another one. But this is more of like an enthusiast. This is more like a futures thing, new technology. Whereas these two are definitely the strongest things. Mobility. Well, mobility. There was a lot of mobility, and there was a lot of data center. These are the underlying themes of Computex 2024. So, the reason why people found it boring was because if you didn't care about the 5 things that are listed here, the only other thing that you would have been looking for was the typical fans, cases, peripherals. Those things. Those things are always at Computex. But they were kind of drowned out by these other things that got way more screen time. Time in the spotlight, if you will. So, these were the keynotes. Those were the keynotes. We had a bunch of them. Probably a lot of people seem to think AMD's was the best. I'm actually going to say that I think Qualcomm's was the best. So I've ranked them here in order of which ones from the best to the least, or I guess the least interesting. Some people might want to say Intel's was more interesting than NVIDIA's. I will say Intel's was entertaining, and it had its high points, and it also wasn't super long. The problem with NVIDIA's one, actually, you know what? Maybe Intel did do better than NVIDIA. The problem with NVIDIA's was that it was 2 hours long, and there was a lot of Jensen moments in it. And other than the Jensen moments, it was very boring. So maybe Intel's was actually better than NVIDIA's. But I think most people would agree with me that Qualcomm and AMD had the best keynotes. Some people might say AMD's was better than Qualcomm's because AMD's was probably more interesting than Qualcomm's. But this is the year of ARM. In fact, I think ARM had their own press conference, but it was not as interesting as Qualcomm's. Qualcomm kind of stole the show. If you ask anyone that was there in person, one of the things that they'll remember from this CES, specifically, is Snapdragon. Snapdragon X Elite. The Snapdragon X Elite made a strong showing. It's like I said during the live reaction, guys. Qualcomm is like the Mongols coming in and conquering the world. This was a shocking Computex because Qualcomm came out of nowhere, although people who are not tech enthusiasts probably, but they pay attention to the mobile market and they pay attention to technology in general, they probably knew this was coming. A lot of people were probably briefed on this ahead of time, but Qualcomm came in and stole the show. This was supposed to be an AMD and NVIDIA run show, and Qualcomm came in, just blew down the doors, and just took over. Just hostile takeover. Qualcomm did it all, and I think they largely succeeded, at least in getting the message out there, because I think that anybody that was at the show this week in Taipei knows the name Qualcomm, and they will remember the name Qualcomm and the Snapdragon brand. This is their entrance into the PC market. So say what you will about Qualcomm and Snapdragon, they're here to stay, and the reality is this Computex is unique in that it marks the beginning of the end for the PC as we know it. Whether you like it or not, things are going to change from here on out. It'll be a slow change. In the beginning, you won't notice that there's a problem or that there's a change. But just like when Titanic sank, they hit an iceberg, and at the very beginning, the first few minutes after the impact of the iceberg, they didn't really know if there was anything seriously wrong. But as time went by pretty quick, there was something that changed. So there's no different. Qualcomm came in like the iceberg, and now the PC market is going to sink. Sink in a metaphorical sense, not a literal sense. It's going to change. There's going to be some changes that are coming. And some of the enthusiasts are not going to like these changes. But they are going to hit you hard, and it's going to change. One of the things that's going to come in is Cam 2. We're going to talk about that. Power efficiency. This is a big theme of Computex. If you ignore AI for a second, and if you look through the noise, what was the most important thing? Power efficiency. There was so much discussion about power efficiency. And who was driving power efficiency? Qualcomm. Qualcomm. I can't wait to see the review videos comparing the Snapdragon X Elite versus the Ryzen AI, and then later on this year, the Intel Lunar Lake thing that's going to show up toward the end. Snapdragon versus those two. No longer is there a two-party system where you have AMD and Intel in the CPU space for laptops and tablets and PC DIY. Now, Qualcomm's not in the desktop space yet. Mark my words, they're not in there yet. I don't know if they ever have dreams of going into the desktop space, but 10 years ago, nobody thought Qualcomm was going to go into the PC, the laptop space. And here we are. What? How long has the Snapdragon been around? Like 14 years? 15 years? Here we are, like 15 years later, and now they're coming to laptops in droves. So what amazed me about this show was how much marketing and how much showtime the Snapdragon X Elite got. Because it's almost like you guys have to think about this. 5 years ago, AMD launched Zen 2, the Ryzen 3000 series at Computex. They announced it 5 years ago. And here we are. So it basically took AMD half a decade to build up that recognition and basically get their name out there. Here you are in one Computex. Qualcomm comes barging in, makes a whole lot of noise, wows everybody, and now everybody's talking about Qualcomm's Snapdragon X Elite and AI and laptops. And now laptops are cool again. Hence the marketing PC reborn. They had an ingenious marketing strategy. The PC is reborn. They're declaring the PC is reborn. No longer is it X86. They're saying that it is now going to be controlled by ARM. ARM is going to dominate the world and take over what was once the X86 space. Granted, Qualcomm has had years of phone space. Yeah, and that is what allowed them to get all the money to get to where they are now. So yeah, we will acknowledge that Qualcomm did build up all that revenue and R&D funding to get into the PC space over a long period of time. So yeah, Nero, you are right that they did have a long time to build up and finally get in. But it's amazing, like I saw the demos that they showed off, the AI demos, the NPU, they're talking about all this stuff, power efficiency. I can't wait to see the comparison videos of like Snapdragon X Elite versus Ryzen AI. Like the Ryzen, what is it, the 370? That thing, the new Zen 5 mobile with the NPU. Ryzen versus Snapdragon, because that is going to be the first major battle. The first major battle is going to be Snapdragon Elite versus Ryzen AI. It's going to be x86 versus ARM in laptops. Who's going to have better? And you know how they're going to grade them? This is how they're going to grade them. Because Qualcomm sets the narrative. Qualcomm's already the dominant player, or so they claim. So how's it going to be? Hence why I call them the Mongolian Empire of the modern age, from a metaphorical standpoint, because they're literally coming in, they're going to conquer the world. So number one, tops. Number two, battery life. In fact, I actually probably would rank battery life above tops. And then the other stuff would be like the actual SKU specs. So, you know, like, what does a laptop come with? Because ultimately, here's what I think is going to happen. I think AMD is going to win in this, and they're going to win in this, and Qualcomm is going to, the Snapdragon is going to beat them in battery life. I would be surprised if AMD wins in battery life, because, come on, guys, it's a thing that comes from the mobile market versus something that's meant to be plugged into a wall. X86 was never designed to be disconnected from infinite power, essentially, basically running on battery, whereas the ARM processor was always designed to be efficient from its very origins. If you guys watched I think it was ARM's keynote, not the Qualcomm keynote, the ARM keynote, they talked about how they told a story at the beginning of the show, and I didn't even know this. I didn't even know the origin story of ARM, and that story really, really resonated with the audience, because they told the story of how ARM was basically designed to run on the most efficient, like, basically it was designed to be so efficient that back in the day, when the battery ran out, the processor kept on going because it could run off of the remnant leakage current in the electronic device. It didn't die until it didn't stop working until it used up all the capacitance and the leakage current that was still in the device, even after the battery was completely drained. That shows you the difference where ARM is coming from in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of the origin story, and how efficient it was designed to be from all those years ago, versus x86, which, I mean, if you guys have been looking at the recent news about Intel's problems with the Core i9 and all this stuff with using mini nuclear reactor levels of power. Now, I know I'm exaggerating, but you get what I'm saying. Like the amount of overheating, 100 degrees Celsius in 2 seconds, you know, this type of stuff, 350 watts. It's like, oh, it uses more power than Threadripper. You know, like these type of things versus something that could run off of leakage current after a dead battery. Like, I would be amazed if AMD is able to come close to the Snapdragon in terms of battery life in the laptop. But see, this is where it marks the beginning of the end for x86, because first, they're going to win in battery life. Then they're going to start reaching parity in tops. And then they're going to start overtaking them when they get the actual SKUs. Because ultimately, what I think is going to spare AMD and Intel for now is number 3. Number 3 on this list. The actual SKU specs. Because if you're going to buy a laptop, it depends on what you're buying. Now, most of the normal, average people are going to value this and this over the actual SKU specs. When I say SKU specs, I'm talking about things like the built-in speakers, like what's the speaker quality, what's the screen quality on the laptop, does it have a discrete GPU in it, like does it have an NVIDIA graphics card in it, or an AMD graphics card, or just any discrete graphics card, you know what I'm saying, like an Intel Arc is now in some of these. So it's like, does it actually have that? Because ultimately, the Snapdragon X Elite is going to excel in the first 2, but it's going to fall short in this one. Because it's not going to have an NVIDIA discrete option. It's not going to have a Radeon discrete option. It's just going to be the NPU and the integrated GPU and the CPU, and that's it. So that's all you get in your Snapdragon X Elite. And now for most thin and lights, that's all you need. So, and if you're on the go, like if you travel a lot for your job or whatever, and you have a lot of like airport time and that kind of thing, hotel time, you're not going to be hogging along a giant desktop with you or a really, really heavy desktop replacement like an 8-pound laptop. No one's going to do that. It's not practical. So you're going to value battery life and the performance per watt during battery consumption, not plugged into the wall. And that is the reason why number 1 and 2 is where Qualcomm is going to strike first and basically win on those metrics, because those are the metrics that matter the most to people that literally use laptops for work and for like a lot of things. Like, you know, we're not talking about people who just sit and play games all day. We're not talking about those people. Qualcomm's not targeting those people yet. Not yet. That doesn't mean that they're not going to attempt it later. Because they did show off Baldur's Gate 3 running at like 45 frames per second at 1080p on one of their laptops. Now that's pretty impressive. Baldur's Gate 3, 45 frames per second, 1080p. Now I don't know what the graphics preset was. It didn't look like it was maxed out, but that's pretty good for a mobile laptop. So at that resolution. So that's where things are going to get interesting. So this was definitely probably the most like attention-grabbing thing at Computex. Baldur's Gate 3 was also in the intro ship. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, they, you know, it's literally someone from Qualcomm bought the game, loaded it on the laptop just to show it off. So they're gonna be at the first part of the game. The original battery only lasted for 2 hours. Oh, you're talking about the old Elite book. Wow. Burned out 2 of the original spec batteries. Yeah. Yeah. But see, that's why I feel like x86 for now will sustain itself on number 3. And technically, x86 is better in this. At least AMD. So here's the thing. Did you notice that Qualcomm, all the comparisons that I saw was against Intel's Core Ultra. Basically, like they were showing Snapdragon. They had like all these charts like Snapdragon X Elite, and then they had Intel Core Ultra 130, whatever it was, like 139 or what, 190. I don't know. I forget what the Intel SKU was, but it was basically like they had a bar chart, and it was like the Snapdragon was like this, and the Intel one was like that. They were showing like results like this. Like that's what they kept showing off in tops. So they were comparing Snapdragon to Meteor Lake, and it was demolishing Meteor Lake in battery life as expected. I mean, okay, like no one's gonna be impressed with that. I mean, it's Meteor Lake, come on. And then they were beating it in the tops. The NPU was like way faster than the Intel one, because I think Snapdragon was doing like 45 tops. And, you know, like, it's lighter, it's thinner. Oh, the other thing that they kept talking about at the show, they kept talking about how it doesn't heat up. Like, the skin temperature, like, the skin temperature aware of the chassis, it never burns the person using the laptop. Whereas the Intel Core Ultra, he gets up to, like, the internal gets up to, like, 80 degrees Celsius or more on the CPU hotspot. And then so the palm rest on the Intel Core Ultra is at like 50 degrees. It's like more than 100 degrees in some parts of it where the bezel is, where the vent is. So it's like really hot to the touch on the Intel one. They kept talking about that. Like the guy from the Snapdragon marketing side kept saying how, hey, it's like our CPUs run really cool. Our laptop is cool to the touch. It doesn't burn your hands. It gets insane battery life. It's better in AI, all this stuff. Like, basically, it was like, come on. It's like, if you're talking to a normal person, like, if you're selling this to a normie, average person who goes to a Best Buy to buy a laptop, like, it's a no-brainer. They're going to look at the Snapdragon, and they're going to look at the Intel thing, and if you tell them, like, touch the Intel laptop, and it's, like, hot to the hand, it's, like, uncomfortable to hold in your hand, whereas, like, the Qualcomm one is, like, cool, the Snapdragon doesn't heat up, it gets, like, 5 times the battery life. Like, what do you think's going to happen? Do you see now what I mean by they're coming in to conquer the world? Like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you supposed to compete with that? For my second Gen i7, both of them cook the same way. You're not gonna be able to see, you know, those videos where people like boil or like fry eggs, like they'll cook eggs on a CPU. No one's gonna be able to do that on a Snapdragon. No one's gonna be able to do that on a Snapdragon. It's not gonna happen. This is what I'm talking about. For the amount of heat you feel on the phone, imagine that on a laptop heatsink. I don't even know. See, the thing is, I don't think it's going to get that hot. Like, the phone will be hotter than the laptop because the phone is much smaller. So the 15 watts or so, the 12 to 10, well, 10 to like 15 watts peak that you have to dissipate on a phone, there's so much less surface area that it's going to get hot. But imagine like a 15 to 25 watt, or actually, I have to look up the specs, but the Snapdragon Elite, you know, like, you're on a much larger, like a 16-inch laptop with that, like, really, it's not going to heat up. It's not going to burn at all. Like, it's never going to feel as hot as the phone. That's the thing. And they were saying that it's always cool to the touch because, you know, like, the laptop's so big and the processor doesn't use that much power, it's just naturally going to be that way. Like, it's just not going to generate enough heat. That's all there is to it. And that translates into better battery life. That also translates into a longer lifespan of the battery in general. Because batteries wear out faster if they discharge quickly and recharge quickly. And that's why I don't like quick charge. I don't like using quick charge on batteries because that means the battery will not live as long as if it didn't have that. So quick charging and then quick discharging, because if the laptop uses a lot of power, you discharge fast, you recharge fast, you discharge fast. That charging and recharging, discharging and recharging cycle causes the battery to die or wear out faster than if you slow discharge and slow recharge. So this is the thing, like, in the grand scheme of things, this may not appear like it's a big deal to people who don't see the big picture. See, you can't be short-sighted on these things. This to me is probably one of the most memorable Computex events that I have seen in a very long time. The last time there was a Computex that was this, what's the word I want to use? This interesting. I want something better than interesting. The last time I saw a Computex, or I witnessed a Computex, that was, well, it was 2019. It was basically when AMD revealed Zen 2. When AMD revealed the Ryzen 3000 series, that was the last time there was something worth getting excited about for Computex, for the Computex event itself. This time around, everybody's talking about AI. Everyone's excited about AI. And actually, when you think about it, some of the stuff that they showed off is very interesting, but a lot of it is stuff that we have already seen before. Like, if you're unless you're someone who never pays attention to AI, then you probably thought the AI stuff was the most interesting stuff to look at this year. But if you're someone who already knew about a lot of that, like the chat GPT things, the language models, the image generation, the music generation, the language translation, the code generation, they showed off all that stuff at the show, especially on the Snapdragon X Elite. If you're someone who already knew about that, then it's not going to be that interesting. It's not going to be that novel. But the Snapdragon X Elite, this is the same sort of moment in time where it makes me feel like it's 2019 all over again. When AMD showed off Zen 2 and PCI Gen 4 with the 5700 XT as the world's first PCI Gen 4 capable graphics card, and the world's first, with the X570 chipset, the world's first PCI Gen 4 motherboard. That was like a moment in time where, hey, PC is actually cool again. There's new stuff. Like, we had been on PCI Gen 3 since, like, 2012. So it was like 7 years. It took 7 years to see the next generation of PCIe. And AMD brought that with the X570 chipset and Zen 2. And that means NVMe 4 or NVMe drives got faster. Graphics cards could potentially get faster. All that good stuff. So that was the last time Computex was worth getting excited about. This time, everybody was expecting or hoping, let's hope for Battle Mage. Maybe they're going to show off something. Maybe NVIDIA's going to announce something. I mean, seriously, did you really think NVIDIA was going to announce anything that gamers care about? No, of course not. So NVIDIA is in a different world, guys. NVIDIA has ascended to the next level. Like, they're not on the same playing field anymore. They're in a different league. It's like, it's like the NBA. They're in a completely different league. Like, they're not going to compete in this realm right now. Like, what are you talking about? It's like Eastern Conference and Western Conference. Like, what's going on here? They're not even in the same conference anymore. Like, they got transferred for some reason. So it's like, whatever. Okay. Guess who took their place? Qualcomm took their place. Snapdragon X Elite. That's the new thing. That's the new kid on the block. Everybody's talking about the Snapdragon. It sounds cool. It's the X Elite. You can make music with it, with AI. You can make images with it, with AI. And guess what? You don't need to buy a super expensive, like $2,000 graphics card to do any of that stuff anymore, because a Snapdragon X Elite can do all of it. The only other hardware chip designer that was there, that was showing off similar stuff, was AMD. AMD was the only other one. I think anybody who is a computer enthusiast and a gamer and all this stuff, the only company that seemed to address that demographic, that audience, was AMD. Nobody else except Qualcomm turned a blind eye. Everybody just ignored the gamers. Everyone just kind of like snubbed them. You know, even Jensen Huang, even during the NVIDIA press conference, NVIDIA showed their true colors in that show. There was a moment where he was like, he literally shows, Jensen goes off to the side, he picks up a 4080 Super. He picks up a 4080 Super, and he's like, hey guys, everybody knows this is a GPU. But he's like, but you know what? This is just a gamer's GPU. Then he goes off to the side, and it shows like this giant rack of all the DGX equipment, and he's like, this is a GPU. This is a GPU. This whole thing is a GPU. And then he's like, that's why they start talking all this weird stuff, and he's like, the more you buy, the more you save. Hence, everybody's saying, the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more... So that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. They got everyone on their side when it comes to AI, and that's where they're going. AI was overwhelming this year. AI branding on every... Yeah, but see, here's the thing. You gotta keep in mind that you gotta look at where they were, who they were talking to. Who were they talking to? Do you think NVIDIA was talking about AI, but who is NVIDIA actually talking to? Who is Jensen talking to when he was doing that press conference, that keynote? Was he talking to a gamer? No, he was not. Who's he talking to? He's talking to people who are going to write. Yes, he's talking to OpenAI, Anthropic. He's talking to all the AI startup companies, the investors for these AI startup companies, the investors in NVIDIA themselves. He's talking to NVIDIA's employees. He's talking to the board of directors, because he's I am proving to you guys, like, we're going here. We're really taking the world here. You know, he starts talking about the digital twin of the earth and all this stuff, and they're in medical, they're in self-driving cars, they're in financial services, they're in stock trading, they're in this and that and that. So you can see where they're going. They're going into a different level of their company's existence. They have graduated from the gamers. They've graduated from that market. This is a turning point. This is an inflection point in NVIDIA's history. This is probably the other thing that is the key takeaway of Computex. NVIDIA is graduated. It's called NVIDIA's Ascension and the Coming of Snapdragon and the War of the West, because this is what's happening. It's almost like I just said the title of a book. Maybe I should write a book about this. Like, it sounds really cool. It's like you got Snapdragon coming in, from the roaring west. It's like you got this giant Mongolian army just coming in. The Snapdragon is the banner. They're coming. They're gonna crush everything in their way and just demolish X86. Meanwhile, you got NVIDIA, who's like, I have ascended, guys. I have reached godhood. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, So now, with that, NVIDIA's like, hey, I don't have to compete with you anymore. I have elevated myself to God tier. Now I don't have to deal with AMD anymore. I don't have to deal with Intel. You guys can get destroyed by Snapdragon. Who cares? Bye, I'm out. So that's basically what happened. Don't you understand? This is what's happening. This is what's happening. The people who were like, there were so many people that were disappointed because they're like, how come there was no 5090? Where's the 5080? Where's RDNA 4? Where's Battlemage? Like, these people are so short-sighted, they don't understand what's the big picture. Look at the big picture. Look around. Look what's happening. It's not like, oh, 5090. Do you think NVIDIA cares at the 5090 at this point? No, when the profit margins on the data center is like so much higher, exponentially higher? Like, what? Look, open your eyes and look at what's going on. Who cares with the 5090? Like, who cares? You think they care? Their stock valuation cemented an end times for gamers? The end times? Yeah, well, okay, and here's the thing. That is a great comment because that is a perfect segue into another thing. I want to bring back something that we talked about last week. Remember, guys, when I talked about how gaming has turned into 3 different categories. Live service, which includes gacha and buying skins of characters on League of Legends and Fortnite. So that's live service, and that's the biggest cash cow. Number 2, AAA games. Spider-Man 2, Sony's first-party titles, Horizon Forbidden West, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War Ragnarok, like Elden Ring, like these type of games, the big games with all the big graphics, Avatar, Cyberpunk 2077, like all these type of games, Witcher 3, the AAA games, that's another category. Then the third category would be the indie titles, like random games that are like $5 on Steam. Like that's it. Gaming has transformed into like 3 different categories. It doesn't, irrespective of the genre. The genre still exists. Racing car games still exist. Fighting games still exist. Sports games exist. First-person shooters exist. But at the end of the day, they're one of 3 categories. It's either a AAA live service game or a AAA single player, big budget. It took like $300 million to make the game and hire all the voice actors and do all the motion capture and all that stuff. Like those type of games that take like 5 years to make or 10 years to make. In the case of like GTA 6, it's taken more than like 10 years to make that one game. So, those type of games. And then there's the indie games, like some small scrappy studio somewhere that bands together. They got like 5 to 10 people, maybe 15 people max, and they make a game, and they sell it for like anywhere from $1.99, like $2 to like $10 on Steam or something. And Steam takes 30% of the cut, so they barely make any money on it. So it's like, whatever. Like those type of games. Games that are made in like RPG Maker and Unreal Engine 4, because it's free, not UE5, not the really high-end stuff, just the old stuff. Like, that's basically what gaming has become. So, that's basically it. That's the gaming market today. So when we talk about the end times for gamers, I don't want to say it's the end. It's not the end. It's an inflection point. It's a point of no return where gamers are on this roller coaster that's now kind of going downhill. And there isn't really any way to stop or turn around or change the course of where they're headed. Like, there's no way to change that, really. It's just, that's how it is. This is how the market's just moving in that direction. Actually, AMD's Instinct, you mean Instinct, right? Not Instruct. Instinct was kind of interesting. Well, AMD had a lot of interesting stuff. Honestly, if we're talking about Computex from a traditional sense, I think the most interesting stuff was from AMD and the AIBs, the partner companies, Acer, Asus, MSI, Thermaltake, Be Quiet, Noctua, those guys, that they had more interesting stuff than like all this AI nonsense. Do you think Qualcomm will slide into the GPU gaming market? So here's what I think Qualcomm is going to do next. So, like I said earlier, let me get rid of this. We don't need these two. So, what I think is going to happen is Qualcomm will win probably in number 2. AMD will beat them in number 1 and number 3. This is what I expect to see happen, guys. When it comes to Qualcomm will win in battery life. But that's about the only thing they'll win in, initially, with this first generation, with a Snapdragon X Elite. AMD, in an apples-to-apples comparison, AMD will actually outpace them in the actual tops. Because AMD's Ryzen AI 370 is doing, like a 24-core, or 12-core, 24-thread in laptop that AMD's putting out there. That thing has 50 tops in the NPU. 50 tops versus Qualcomm's 45 tops. So they'll, on paper, AMD will edge them out. And remember, Qualcomm is coming in as the challenger. AMD is the incumbent. AMD is like the first defender, if you will. Intel's the second defender. We'll talk about Intel in a little bit. But in the beginning, it's going to be a lot of AMD versus Snapdragon. It's going to be a lot of Ryzen AI versus Snapdragon X Elite. And AMD will win in tops by a small amount, by like 5 tops. Qualcomm will win in battery life. I don't see how AMD can beat them in battery life. Although AMD, if there's anyone that can hold them off, AMD has a better chance compared to Intel at holding them off, because AMD's got the better battery life compared to Intel. And that's why in a direct comparison against Snapdragon, AMD's battery life, it'll probably lose, but it'll do okay. It's not going to be like terrible, you know. But here's the thing: AMD is going to win in this number 3. Number 3 is going to make AMD win the battle against Snapdragon, against Qualcomm. Because here's the thing: you can get a Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite in a thin and light with really good battery life, and it can do all this AI gimmicky stuff. But alternatively, you can get an AMD Ryzen AI that has higher tops, slightly worse battery life, but the AMD is going to also include NVIDIA RTX 4060 or RTX 4070. And this is where AMD will win the battle. I'm not going to say they're going to win the war, because the war is going to be a very long fought war. But they're going to win the battle. The way I see it, it's basically Ghost of Tsushima. Think of Ghost of Tsushima. We cover that game on this channel. The Mongols are Qualcomm. The Japanese are AMD. That's how I see it. Guess why? Here's why. AMD is the defender. AMD, it's their turf. It's their territory. It's x86. It's laptops. Hello, it's AMD laptops. We got laptops here, and they've been doing laptops for like a long time. Qualcomm is coming in. They're the invader. They are the challenger. Therefore, they are the Mongolian Empire coming in to do battle. So AMD has to defend against them. So it's basically Ghost of Tsushima. It's literally the story of Ghost of Tsushima in a metaphorical sense. AMD is the Japanese samurai and the Ronins, and Qualcomm is the Mongolian Mangudais and the light cavalry. That's basically what you have in this battle, in this first battle. Now, later on in the year, Intel is going to come and sort of help AMD. Not really. They're not helping them in any way, but they're also trying to defend their turf. So I think of Intel as the Persians and the Chinese in the Mongol theater. Because remember, Intel is a much bigger company. So here, let's draw this out. Let's make a map. How about we do that? Okay, so here we have like AMD. We have basically where the Japanese are. We got AMD's territory. Then we have, then we've got, okay, I need to remove this part, PC Reborn. Get rid of this. It's funny how you can relate this to Ghost of Tsushima, or you can actually relate this to history in a metaphorical sense. It's very, it actually makes a lot of sense. So over here, you've got Intel, and then you got Intel. You got Intel, and apparently Intel's got like 2 territories, I guess. They got like 2 heads. You know, so you got like Intel over here, and then you got Intel over there. So, and then you have Qualcomm, which is the invader. You got Qualcomm. Qualcomm has their little territory. They got like no territory, actually. But they are invading. They are invading. They're invading here. They're going to invade here. And they're going to invade here in a different way. We'll talk about that one later. So Qualcomm's invading, just like the Mongols. You got Japan over here, which is basically AMD, because they're small and nobody thinks about them. So that's basically Japan, the Japanese, getting invaded. They're a little island nation over there. They're doing their thing. That's AMD. Meanwhile, you got the Chinese. You got Chinese over here. Guess what? The Mongols come in. They invade China. They conquer China. So Qualcomm wants to conquer Intel's market share. Think about it. Why? Because what does Intel have? Intel has the laptops. Intel has the Microsoft Surface. Intel has all the mobility products that are not smartphones. You know, like Intel NUC, Intel embedded devices. Although AMD is now in that too. You know, Intel's largely the dominant player in that market. And Qualcomm is like, guess what? We're taking it over. That's my market now. I'm coming for that market. This is why it is the war. This is the war. This Computex marks Qualcomm's declaration of war against the X86 nations. You understand that? The X86 nations are AMD, Intel, and Intel. There's AMD, Intel, and Intel. Okay, there's 2 Intels and there's an AMD, and that's basically it. Most mini PCs are AMD these days. Sort of, but Intel still volume sells. Intel still volume floods the market, like I said in previous live streams. Now, what's interesting is the more Intel starts relying on TSMC, the less Intel is able to do that from a strategic standpoint. It's not as easy for Intel to outsell or outship product against AMD if they're relying on the exact same foundry that AMD has always relied on since the last 5 years. So this is the reason why this Computex is interesting. See, from my perspective, this is how I see it. But a lot of the people who don't pay attention to this, who don't think about the big picture, they don't know that this is actually what happened. They don't see the underlying themes, the undertones, the actual things that are going on behind the scenes. This is it. This is the secrets revealed. This is the reality of the landscape of the technology place for all the enthusiasts. This is the sort of stuff that's actually happening. NVIDIA has been elevated to godhood. They're no longer part of this. That's why we're not even talking about them right now. There's no reason to talk about them. We're talking about what's going to happen in the PC space. Because, see, it's like the GPU is a secondary market relative to the PC market. See, this is the reason why when you look at AMD's earnings reports, Radeon is reported as a separate thing, whereas client PC does not include Radeon. It's only the Ryzen CPUs, because the Ryzen CPUs, that is the foundation of the x86. That is the core of the PC space. So this is the reason. Do you guys understand now why Snapdragon X Elite, the slogan was the PC reborn? The PC reborn. Meanwhile, what you have here, you have NVIDIA casting a spell, NVIDIA casted like this, like tier 3 elite spell. This top tier spell. Jensen cast a spell on all the tech enthusiasts so that they're basically blinded from this. I don't know why. He just kind of, whatever. He basically solar flared everybody, and then they're all stuck there saying, the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, That's what they had them do. So meanwhile, you got Qualcomm, like, coming in fast, and they're like, guess what? Guess what, guys? Thanos snapped, the PC's reborn. Hello, it's ARM. The time has come. Goodbye, x86. That's what's going on. See, that's what's happening here. Now, it sounds like some kind of ridiculous, like, comedy or some nonsense, but this is actually the truth. This is actually the truth. AMD has way better integrated graphics than Intel. Yeah. Wait, why are we talking? Okay, the GPU, guys, the GPU is a secondary thing. That matters so small in the grand scheme of things compared to the top performance, the tops of the NPU. Because everyone's talking about power efficiency. The other thing, too, that I want to point out real quick is that remember when I pointed out here that the key themes, one of the key themes is power efficiency? That is certainly true, because if AMD did not address power efficiency, or if Intel did not talk about power efficiency, especially Intel, but both of them, both of the x86, I'm basically combining them into one entity now. If the x86 nations, the nation states, if they did not talk about power efficiency, they would be the laughing stock of the show, because Snapdragon X Elite was all about energy efficiency and battery life and how the laptop doesn't generate any heat. You know what I mean? Like, obviously they have to address it. And what is fascinating, what's even more interesting about this Computex than any other Computex in a long time, is for the first time you saw AMD show comparisons to Apple's processor, because they wanted to prove that they beat Apple in the AI workload. Like, Strix basically beats Apple in, like, all of that stuff. So it's like, forget about Intel. Intel's a joke. It's like, hey, the real people to compare against are ARM and Apple. And guess what? We beat them. We bring the tops. That's what everybody's looking for. So AMD did really well. AMD probably did the best. And AMD was the only company that actually showed something that the tech enthusiasts actually care about, aka Zen 5. And they actually are launching it next month, which is pretty surprising, because I actually thought it was going to be a little bit later, but it actually came basically as early as I thought it would. What about Threadripper? Threadripper is... You can't even compare Threadripper. Threadripper is like way too much. Threadripper, that would be like comparing a 18-wheeler Semi to a Toyota Corolla. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't do that comparison. That's not the right comparison. Threadripper will demolish all of those things, but remember, Threadripper doesn't run on battery. So it's like, that's why we're not talking about it. It's not part of this discussion. Now, there is something interesting to say about Threadripper. Well, not really Threadripper, but EPYC in general. We can talk about that toward the end. But AMD is doing some pretty interesting things. We'll talk about AMD in a little bit. Let's finish up this whole thing about the war of x86 and ARM, because I have never seen the war escalate to this level. Like, this is the true war. This is the war that everybody has always talked about. All the chip designers, all the people who have been following CPU architecture since the RISC days and Fortran and Cobalt, like, now here it is. The war finally has come. x86 versus ARM. It's like, it's full on, because for a decade there had been like threats that ARM would like come in and cause problems, and it sort of did, but in indirect ways. The best example I can give you is Apple going with their M1 and then their M2, and it's like, goodbye Intel, we don't need you anymore. We're Apple, forget about you, like you're done, you're dead to us now. We don't need you, haha. So that was the end of that. So that was one thing, and then there was there's like Amazon and Google and Meta trying to make ARM-based servers, so they don't need to rely on EPYC or Intel Xeon. And then like Intel, if anybody's scared right now, let me tell you who's scared right now. These people. These people are scared right now. Like this is scary. AMD should be worried too. AMD should definitely be worried, because usually, see, the problem is when you have so first of all, think of it like this. AMD's already the little guy. Like, they're already the little guy who's often drowned out from all the advertising noise, the ads and commercials, Intel Inside, you know, like 14900K, best this, that, blah, blah, blah. Like, that kind of stuff. Because they're sort of like not marginalized, but they're kind of diminished in terms of their visibility in the public space, that already puts them at a disadvantage, even if their product is better than the competitor. In this case, AMD is actually a lot better than Intel right now, especially in mobile. And that's where things are going to get really interesting later on this year. And that war would have just played out like it always does, you know. But now things are different, because now all of a sudden you have this. You have the dark horse candidate coming in from out of nowhere. The Snapdragon is making a big splash. And with Snapdragon, with all the money, with all the marketing, with all the like advertising and ads and stuff, like you can imagine, they are gonna get their name out there to a point where they could easily overtake AMD just because of marketing alone. Like, even if their product is inferior, like we said, AMD actually is better than them in tops, and AMD's laptops offer better actual specs. Like, the complete package for an AMD laptop versus a Snapdragon, like the AMD Ryzen is like way better. So it's not even like it's not even a true proper comparison. But you can rest assured you're gonna see like the average normie person who goes to Best Buy to buy a laptop, they're more likely to become educated very quickly and made aware of Snapdragon's laptop before they ever even get a chance to hear about an AMD laptop. And that's the sad reality of the like AMD's existence for some reason. That's how it always seems to be. So even if AMD is better than Qualcomm, like they're still probably just gonna be ignored. So the war will happen. The true battle will be Snapdragon versus Intel. This battle is going to be the one that's really heats up. It really escalates to the next level. So think of Ghost of Tsushima. AMD as the samurai. They basically will repel Qualcomm from their territory, and they'll just maintain, you know, their existence, kind of over here. You know, whatever, we're doing our thing, we're the samurai, whatever. So that's basically how AMD is going to be. Meanwhile, the real deal battle will be like China versus the Mongols, Qualcomm versus Intel, where Qualcomm's like, man, you got all the rich lands, you got all this market share. I want that market share. Move over, X86. ARM's gonna come in here and clean house. Like, that's basically what they want to happen. So that's where it's going to get really interesting, because now you have a company that can compete in terms of marketing, dollars, and word of mouth, and just, well, AMD historically is word of mouth, but Qualcomm is going to get in there by sheer marketing and ads and all this stuff and gimmicks and the promise of infinite battery life and all the text-to-speech and image generation and music generation and all the AI things that you can do. They're gonna outmarket Intel in the AI space. I just know it. They already did it. The thing is, they already did it. if you watch any of the Computex coverage videos, you'll see way more demos in addition to Baldur's Gate 3 gameplay on a Snapdragon X Elite than you'll see of any demo running on an AMD or an Intel system. So they're already doing it. They're already out marketing both Intel and AMD in the laptop space. And they have to. They have to because they are the challenger. It has to be this way. So AMD's biggest problem was that they never tried to do a big push, big marketing push like the way Qualcomm is doing now. And because of that, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to say. They have nothing really to show for it. They have a really good product line, but no one ever seems to really know. No one ever seems to pay attention. So, and you can't really blame a normie for that. You know, that's on AMD to correct, not the other way around. Because look at Snapdragon. They're doing just fine. ARM driver support is probably its Achilles heel. That is exactly what AMD and Intel will say. That's exactly what they'll say. They'll say that, oh, compatibility with Windows is not tried and tested, blah, blah, blah. That's what they're going to say, and there may be some truth to that in the beginning. But, you know, you get past this first generation, it's all downhill from there. The audio isolation was kind of interesting. Most ARM support on Android. Well, did you watch any of that stuff, though? Okay, here's the thing. Did you guys even pay attention to how many, like... Okay, first of all, did you guys watch the Qualcomm... I mean, I did a reaction to some of the Qualcomm keynote. Qualcomm had Microsoft in person. They had Asus. They had Dell, HP. Basically, Qualcomm had the most in-person co-host / guest / visitors on stage compared to AMD and Intel. AMD had like the second most, and then Intel was like the third or something like that. I think Asus actually had more than Intel. So Intel did not have that many people in person. Intel had like a bunch of people that were like pre-recorded, scripted, you know, like, oh, we stand with Intel, our long-term partner. It's great to be continuing the partnership, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's all they said. It's like, it's all formality at that point. You know, like, that's all they did. Meanwhile, Qualcomm, you get them in person. They show up, they get on stage, they show off their laptop, like, hey, look, here's our Lenovo. Hey, look, here's the HP Elite book and the OmniBook. Dell, yeah, we got everything. So it's like everybody's doing their thing. They got that wall. They had the wall of laptops on the Qualcomm stage. Not like Pat. Pat pulled down those things that had cool, like, effects and stuff, which were actually way cool to watch, but like, he was the only guy there. I think he had like one guest or two maybe. Oh yeah, the shoes. Yeah, they had the shoes. They had the shoes. People who were talking about like like Windows and Snapdragon. Dude, the guy Cristiano was wearing shoes that said Snapdragon Snapdragon on one side and Copilot on the other side. Seriously, man. He had the Snapdragon Copilot shoes. I want those shoes. He had the shoes. Turn left, turn right. No, that was the Asus one. The Asus one was the one turn left, turn right. Now back to the center. Yeah. See, the thing is, they all had their weird like gimmicks or their weird like things. See, I'm gonna delete the empires here. The PC Reborn. The PC Reborn was the theme of Snapdragon X Elite. But basically, what do we have here? We had NVIDIA. What was NVIDIA's... How do we summarize NVIDIA's show? It's easy. Say it with me now. I'm so tired of saying it. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. That's basically the NVIDIA show. What is Snapdragon's show? Qualcomm show. The PC is reborn. That's their show. The PC is reborn. They're redefining it. They're changing all the rules. They're changing all the rules. Somebody mentioned earlier, I saw the comment scroll by. What was that comment about, like, ARM going into desktop? What was that? Jensen didn't know where his precious GPUs were. He was holding, for those that were wondering what was the card he was holding an RTX 4080 Super. That's what he had on stage. He couldn't even be bothered to bring a 4090 to the show. It's like, no, I don't, whatever. Just give me one of them. Just give me one of the ones in the back. Oh, it's a, whatever. I don't care what it is. He didn't even say what it was. He was like, yeah, you guys know what this is? This is a GPU. But he's like, but this is a gamer's GPU. Then he's like, this is a GPU. And then he shows like this giant rack of like all this AI stuff. Qualcomm's getting into desktop, X86. Wait, what do you mean X86? It's not X86. It's an ARM-based CPU for desktop, right? That is the most terrifying thing for Intel, though, dude. Like, that is terrifying. That is the final nail in the coffin, man. Because they're in so much trouble. They're in so much trouble. You guys have no idea. When the Snapdragon X Elite press conference, the keynote was going off, Intel stock kept on like doing like this. And because there's all these the alarm bells were going off like in Intel HQ, like they're going, and then like the AMD one, they're probably got alarms going off too. Like Lisa Su was like, she like looks down at her smartwatch or whatever, and she's like, oh man. like Intel's got like everything's like DEFCON 1, war was declared. And then meanwhile AMD's getting the notification like, yeah, oh man, Qualcomm, not again. like that's basically how they reacted. Did you guys notice how like the whole focus was on like how they stack up in tops? Like everybody was talking about tops. Like that was it. That was all they were talking about. Do you guys remember how Intel tried to like cheat? Like, okay, during the Intel, you know how Jensen was saying like that's CEO math. It is not accurate, but it is correct. Like he had those weird things that he was saying. Intel did something hilarious. Intel was like, Intel was like, okay, NPU equals 40 tops, CPU equals, well, okay, they didn't say CPU. GPU equals, what did they say? It was like 80 tops or something. It was like, there's something like this. Like they were doing something like this. Intel was like, NPU equals 40 and 80, therefore we have 120 tops. When I saw that, I was like, are you serious? You cannot say that with a straight face. That's like, what is this? This is cheating. What? They're like, dude, seriously, like, did you see that? Like, I saw that, I was like, are you serious, Pat? What is this? Okay, Snapdragon was like, NPU equals 45 tops. Like, this is how Snapdragon presented it. And Pat Gelsinger's like, okay, NPU equals 40, 80, the GPU, we have 120 tops. What? Like, this is stupid. Like, if you're gonna do that, do they realize if they do that, they kill their battery life? And then they look like the retards? Like, what? You cannot include that, dude. That's not how it's done. That's not how you grade the thing. Like, what? I mean, at least AMD wasn't stupid enough to try to cheat like that. That looks dumb. At least AMD, they didn't show, because see, AMD could have easily did that too. CEO math. Yeah, that's CEO math. Like AMD was like, okay, Ryzen AI is 50 tops, which is greater than 45 tops. That's basically how they did it. That's what they showed. It's like, this is the math. Like, see, this is the reason why one of the key takeaways from Computex was everybody said that AMD's was straight and to the point. Like, AMD's show was straight and to the point. Like, they didn't beat around the bush. Yes, they talked about AI, but they didn't, like, overdo it like the way NVIDIA did. And they didn't really, like, mislead anybody, or they didn't attempt to. They just kind of like, here's what we got. You know, this is the thing. But that's Lisa Su's style. Like, she's she's a straight shooter, you know? Like, she's just going to tell you the facts. This is what we did. I mean, that's how you can tell that she is an engineer. You can tell that she's an engineer because she is all about the hard facts. And that's basically, and like, here's what we have. This is what we worked on. This is what we did. This is what the engineers came up with. And that's basically it. You know, like, that's what we got. Okay, 50 tops. That's what we got. You know, like, and they announced all these partnerships with, you know, all the laptop people. And they've got all these cool laptops coming out. So, yeah, that was basically it. They didn't try to, like, mislead anybody. They easily could have did it, too. Like, I don't even know. I didn't even know what the tops number was on AMD's RDNA 3.5 integrated GPU, whatever that thing is, like the successor to the 780M, or maybe it's just the 780M again. I forgot, but whatever it was, like, that's basically what it was. You know, like, they didn't include it though. They could have, but they didn't. So, but I liked this. This was hilarious. That was hilarious when I was like, really? Okay, you're just gonna show like your full power, man. Okay, that's that's the full power. Like basically, I'm thinking like, okay, that's basically like when Trunks powered up. You know, when future Trunks fought Cell, and Vegeta basically lost to Cell, and then Trunks had to fight Cell. This is before the Cell games. This is Dragon Ball Z reference. If those wondering what I'm talking about right now, it's basically like this. Doing this is like when Trunks tried to like power up and puff up his puny muscles, like made them really, really big, but then he couldn't actually like hit Cell because he was too slow. Like, this is basically what that was. I'm like, really? This is what you're doing? Like, you're gonna reveal? Okay, that's your maximum. Like, you can't do anything better than that. So it's like, okay, this is not a good way to present it. Intel and AMD do not give out license like ARM. Well, the thing is, you can't do x86. Intel owns the royalties for x86. There's like a cross-license agreement for AMD to build x86, but that's the reason why there's only 2 players in that space. As you said regarding NVIDIA, we are at an inflection point, though. That is the truth. Yeah. So, it's going to get really interesting. I think the mobile, if you're someone who pays attention to the mobile products, I know most of my viewers don't care about mobile, but I'll tell you this, it was very entertaining. Like, this CES was more entertaining than the last couple of CES, or did I say CES? Computex, this one was way more interesting. It was way more packed, there was way more people there, from what I saw. It was a little bit disappointing in the sense that none of the cases that were shown off were that interesting. I would say that out of all the things, like, CES back in January actually had more interesting cases. I feel like the RGB wasn't overdone this much. Like, you didn't hear people talking about RGB too much this time around, but I think it's mainly because it was drowned out by all the AI noise. Qualcomm needs a dedicated ASIC to handle ARM to x86, like Apple has for some of their M2. Oh yeah, Antec came back. Antec had been gone for a long time. That's the thing, man. Like, one of the themes of this Computex, I don't have it written down, but it's basically like companies coming out of nowhere. like first Qualcomm comes storming in, and it's like, the PC's reborn. And then it's like, all of a sudden, like, Antec's like, yeah, we're here. Hey, guys. It's like, Antec's back. What? Antec's been gone for, like, what? Like, a decade? And then they just kind of, like, showed up. It's like, where's everybody at? You know, like, we're here. Antec's here, guys. Antec's here, guys. Yeah, Montec's back. Yeah. See, like, that's basically how this went down. Silverstone was there, too. I think Silverstone's always been at Computex, though. But, like, never with a big splash like this year. The drums, we can all admit the drumming part. Yeah, the Intel had the drums. Yeah, they had the drums. They're still going to get invaded, though. They're the ones that are going to be on the defense. Like, the way I see it, you know, I can imagine, man, you know, like, those boss music Dark Souls videos, you know what I'm talking about? Like, those videos where they show, like, this real live clip, or, like, some random animal, and then all of a sudden, like, the boss music, like a boss bar comes up on the bottom of the screen, and then the boss music starts playing from Dark Souls. You know what I'm talking about? Like, that stuff? Like, where it's like somebody's walking around, then all of a sudden a boss bar appears, and there's, like, some weird... Like, that's what's going to happen to Intel. It's like Intel's walking down the street, then all of a sudden, like, a boss bar, it says Snapdragon X Elite, like a boss bar with Snapdragon X Elite appears, and then the music starts playing. The da-na-na-na-na-na-na, or whatever, like the Boreal Valley something, the first boss of Dark Souls 3, that music theme starts playing. Mr. Muscles. Oh, yeah, dude, like, Intel had the most entertaining. First, there was the dude. Remember the guy who was hiding behind the rack? The guy hiding behind the rack. Remember that? First, there was Mr. Muscles. There was Pat. There was Mr. Muscles. There was the dude pushing the cart hidden behind. He literally standing behind the rack. And then there was the part where, like, Pat would go to the wall, and then all of a sudden the bam, like there's all this, like, what? All this, like, this entire wall of hardware is here, just magically here. Remember? He would go to the left, and he did, and they did later on the right side. Yeah, man, like, Intel didn't have a whole lot of, like, they didn't have a lot of substance, but they had a lot of, like, entertainment value in their show. I'll never forget that, the dude behind the rack, though, that looked so weird. At first, when I saw that, man, I want to find that now. That was so funny. Well, I gotta find that now. Intel Computex 2024. Let's see.
Statements in this document that refer to future plans or expectations are forward-looking statements. These statements are based on current expectations and involve many risks.
Hold on, I just want to show you guys the part that we're talking about.
Actual results to differ materially from the.
You know, with that, Chuck, if you
Chuck is Mr. Muscles.
And what do you have here, Chuck?
Well, Pat, I've got 2 racks here. Now, in this first rack, it is full of Xeon 2nd gen scalable processors. So we've got 20 of them in here, all loaded, ready to go. Over here, well, it's basically empty.
Okay, so why don't you...
Okay, you guys don't understand. Like, when I first saw this, I noticed there's a shoulder. There's like an arm here.
Do this, Chuck, and I know you didn't get enough
look at that
time in today. I'd like you to fill this rack.
What is this?
Right, with the equivalent compute paper.
At first when I saw this, I was like, wait a minute. Did that dude, I was thinking, like, was this dude, was he not able to walk away fast enough off the stage before they moved the camera over? He's like, uh-oh, I'm stuck.
Ability of the Gen 2 using Gen
6. What? I was like, is this supposed to be here? Like, what's going on?
Give me a minute or two, I'll make it happen.
Okay, get with it. Come on. Hop to it, buddy.
And then he comes out and he brings, like, this whole thing. That's heavy. First of all, if you guys have any idea, if you guys have ever racked and stacked servers before, these things are heavy.
And it's important to think about.
He
the
looks
data
stranded.
centers. Every data center provider I know today is being crushed by how they upgrade.
Man, dude, look at Chuck.
They expand their footprint and the space, the
I
flexibility.
was worried for him, though. I was a little bit nervous that he was going to throw out his back because he's, like, leaned over too far for something so heavy.
For high performance computing. They have more demands for AI in the data center. And
See, look, this dude can't leave. He has to hold the rack because the thing is, those servers are so heavy that if this guy wasn't standing here to hold the rack, as Chuck is putting in the servers, the rack, because it's on wheels, it would easily be pushed into the screen and damage the screen. That's why they need this guy to be here.
having a processor with
Those things are heavy. Those servers are heavy.
44 cores versus 28 cores for Gen 2 gives them the ability to both condense
Hold on,
as
and
well
then-
as to attack
and then
these
the other
new
part
workloads
that was
as well,
really
with
good-
performance and efficiency that was never seen before. So Chuck, are you done?
I'm done. I wanted a few more reps, but you said equivalent. I even put a little bit more.
Okay, so let me get it. That rack has become this.
It has become that.
Now, but of course,
Okay, but see, look.
with this, the entire ecosystem is lining up behind Gaudi 3, and it's my pleasure today to show you the wall of Gaudi 3.
Oh man, this was so good. That was so good. This is like a 10 out of 10. This is, except it's missing the smoke. It's missing the smoke and the fireworks. Okay, that's all I wanted to show you guys. That was so good though. And they did it again later on the other side. That was like the best part of that entire thing though. Chuck, the dude with the servers, and then the wall, the Gaudi 3 wall. No wheel locks? Well, I guess they didn't. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. They should have wheel locks, but I guess they didn't put them on or whatever. Anyway, so the thing is, Qualcomm is entering the PC space with their partnership with Microsoft. So realistically, it's all because Microsoft allowed them to do this, and to Qualcomm's credit, they have proven that they could make an ARM processor that is strong enough in performance to handle Copilot because of the NPU and handle Windows. You know, the way X86 has done for decades. So, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, they get a shot at it now, so we'll see. We'll see how AMD and Intel respond. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, like, a year from now. So, Pat could be the necromancer? What do you, in what way? Unplugged games at 1080p 60. Copilot is 99% in the cloud. Well, a lot of that was they were talking about like Microsoft recall, Windows recall, and all those things. And they were trying to say that a lot of it was run locally. But we'll see. Well, as this hardware gets out there into the field, only time will tell what becomes of this stuff. Like if they succeed. I really think that they are going to succeed, though. From what I saw, they showed off like some really, really good like use cases and demos at the Snapdragon X Elite booth. So, yeah, I think it's gonna... We'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's gonna be harder... It's gonna be harder for AMD to compete because they've always kind of been drowned out in the background. And I think with Snapdragon, things are gonna get worse for them. But Intel's the one that stands to lose the most from all of this, literally, because EPYC is eating their market share in data center. Apple kicked them out because of M1 and M2, so they're losing the revenue streams in the areas where the profit margins are large. Now, Intel still has a large networking division. Like, they still make chips for a lot of networking and telecommunications equipment. But at the same time, NVIDIA or AMD is in that space now with their acquisition of two companies. Well, actually, no, it's mostly Xilinx. AMD acquired Xilinx for the FPGAs, and that's really going to help AMD in the long run. They also partner up with MediaTek for things like the Wi-Fi 7, the Wi-Fi 6E chipsets, and all these things for the networking gear. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Overall, though, I will say, like, okay, let's change topics a little bit. So let's get off of this whole, like, let's delete all this. Let's get rid of this stuff, because we're done with that now. So, in the server world, I think it's going to be very interesting. There were some interesting things that Intel showed up. Intel has Xeon, the new Xeons. They have the 144. They have 144E cores. Because, okay, here's the thing. Lunar Lake is, I think, TSMC. TSMC 3 nanometer or 4 nanometer? Someone's going to have to let me know what that one is. I forget what that one is. But Intel 3 is the new Xeons. Or I guess the Xeon, or I guess whatever they like, 144E core Xeon is Intel 3. And then likewise Xeon, I don't know what the new P core one is. 64. I don't know what the new, like, the P core one is that they showed off. But that one is also Intel. P core is Intel 3. So the data center, the enterprise gear, is where Intel's 3 node, or whatever that nanometer translates to, I don't really know. But basically, Intel's using their own fabs to make their new Xeons. And their new Xeons are pretty competitive, especially the E-core one. The 144 core E-core is very strong competition against AMD, because, so, like, AMD has Bergamo. What is it? EPYC? Like this? EPYC, Bergamo, 128 Zen 4C, 128 Zen 4C, but this is single socket only. But then they also have the Genoa, which is what, 96 core Zen 4 cores, Zen 4C cores. Yes, yes. Wendell has a very good video on this topic. And that's exactly what I'm basing my discussion here. It's all based off of Wendell's video. Yeah, so in Wendell's video, this one in particular is a very interesting product. 144 SkyMont E-cores. That is a formidable opponent for EPYC. EPYC basically was dominating the data center market to the point where a lot of these companies that were having to do server upgrades, because their servers are like 5 years or 7 years old, they were all switching to Genoa and Bergamo. Well, now, not really Bergamo, mostly Genoa, because the thing is, this one, Bergamo, even though it's 128, 256 thread, I guess I should have put the thread count. This is single socket only. Like, you can't do more than one Bergamo per server node. So, but you can do multiple socket with Genoa. So the thing is, like Wendell was saying, you could do two Xeon 144, so you could get like 288 cores. Basically, he was talking about a server that had two Intel CPUs. It had two of these. It had one, and it had another. This is 144 times 2 equals 288 E cores. This is a typical server configuration for this new Xeon. That is a lot of cores. Now, he said that the alternative, the AMD one, the closest one from AMD would be either one Bergamo or two Genoa. Now, the Genoa is going to cost more. It's going to be more power. So you could do dual Genoa, but for that use case, the Genoa is not what you would use, because the Genoa would be what, like, what is this? 96 times 2, that's what, 192 slash, and then, you know, 384 thread. This is not, okay, this will beat Intel's E-cores because this is like way more threads. It's 384 threads because Genoa has SMT and it's dual socket, whereas E-cores on the new Xeon do not have hyperthreading, so it's literally 1T, 1 thread, or 1 core, 1 thread. So it's 288 versus like 384 threads. So it's, you know, the AMD one's better, but he said like the power is way higher. Like the power consumption of this AMD system is way more than the dual socket Intel SkyMont system. So realistically, there would be a third one here, which would be one Bergamo. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. That's definitely Italian. But it'd be like one Bergamo, and this is 128, 256 thread. So he said like this one would actually be closer. This one would be closer in terms of power consumption and performance, but Intel would still beat it because Intel's got more threads. See? So, very interesting. It's very interesting to see Intel coming back. They're making a big push back into the data center to try to combat AMD because AMD had been rapidly eroding the market share. I think during Lisa Su's press conference, she said that they're like at over 30% in data center now. Keep in mind, 5 years ago, they were at like 0%. So to claw back 30% in 5 years, that is amazing if you think about that. Because typically, can you imagine the amount of effort it would take the AMD sales team, the sales teams to go out there and win the business and convince the customers who historically have always just bought Xeons, you know, every couple of years they do their upgrades and their refresh cycles. Imagine the monumental effort to do the RFPs, to do like the comparison, the lab sessions, the demo sessions, to prove to the customer that the EPYC CPU is better than the Xeon and that it will save them money and it will save them electricity money and it'll save them power savings, space savings, etc. because of the core density, all this good stuff. Like the amount of work to convince somebody to switch from the tried and true Intel over to AMD, like that's very hard to do. You guys have no idea how hard that is to do in a business-to-business purchasing cycle. So, like, to gain 30% market share over 5 years, like that is not an easy thing to do. Just to put it lightly, that is not easy to do. 33%, like that's huge. That's 1/3. So Intel now is starting to make a comeback. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is why I told you guys, I never really worry about Intel because some people will say Intel's too big to fail. The other thing that was kind of weird, well, okay, hold on, let me finish that thought. So I never say worry, or I never really worry about Intel, because they'll always find some way. Like, Intel has so many free passes throughout history to continue to exist, like a get out of jail for free card. Like, they've gotten so many of these, especially recently. Like, they were given so many billions of dollars from the US government. Like, Intel has been given a lot of US tax dollars. They've literally been given free money to build up all these fabs. Now, it remains to be seen what will happen to them. Because, like, one of the guys from PC World, he asked Pat Gelsinger a very, very difficult question, which was a very awkward question to ask. But he did it. Props to him for asking him, because I would have asked the exact same question. He basically asked Pat, the US government recently gave you guys several $billion in funding to build up these fabs. So that being the case, why are you now going with TSMC to build your Lunar Lake and your tiles / chiplets and all this other stuff? Like, why are you going with TSMC if the US just gave you billions of dollars for your fabs? Like, that's a very, very difficult question to answer. Like, if you were Pat Gelsinger, how would you answer that question? So, I opened that up to the chat. How would you answer that question if you're the CEO of Intel and somebody, one of the tech tubers, face-to-face, in person, asked you in front of everybody, U.S. government gave you billions of dollars for your fabs. Why are you going with TSMC to build your chips? At least partially. Especially the ones that are in the consumer space, like Lunar Lake. And you were doing that with the GPUs. And Battle Mage. Why are these not on your own fabs? How would you guys answer that? That's a very difficult question. Those are contributions to our annual... Intel will find a way to throw that money away somehow. They want to use them for server only. So far, Nicholas' answer is the only one that's kind of partially believable, but it takes time to cook a good meal. I understand the meaning behind that, Royal. That's actually kind of how he answered it. So here's what Pat said. He answered it kind of like, it takes time to cook a good meal. What he said was, we have to go with the right node at the right time. That's what he said. So he basically told him, we have to go with the right node at the right time. And he said, in this moment in time, the TSMC node was the one to go with to be competitive. He admitted that. He just straight up admitted that in public. So that's what he said. And that's a good answer. I mean, that's a straightforward answer. And that is the correct answer. But it doesn't prove that they're going to come back. It doesn't prove that they're going to use this money to fix all the nodes and update the foundries and, you know, get back to the position of leadership in the fabrication industry, as Pat has said time and time again. So only time will tell. So did he tell the senators that while begging for said billions? He didn't say that. No, not to them. He only said, he went on the record says after he got the money. So, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's basically... So, okay, we covered the data center discussion. That's what I wanted to say regarding data center, because we talked about consumer. Okay. So this is the cool thing about the data center. Now, ARM wants to get into the data center. Now, I don't know if Qualcomm's the one that's going to lead that charge, but ARM wants to get into data center. Oh, the other thing, let's talk about the last thing about data center was... Hold on. Let me find the slide, because actually they show this. Yeah, they show this. So we'll just use this. Okay, so this is the last thing I wanted to point out And Intel showed it in their presentation. And notice right there, AMD and Intel standing together, because they're going to war. The enemy of my enemy is my ally. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. What? My enemy of my enemy, which is also my enemy. What's the saying? Anyway, they're combining forces. AMD, I didn't know this. Until I listened to one of the interviews with AMD. Like one of the YouTubers was interviewing AMD. Who was it? Oh, it was Wendell. It was Wendell's video. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it was one of Wendell's videos. So it was the interview with AMD. And AMD, I did not know this, but Mark Papermaster from AMD and his team, they are actually the founding member of the Ultra Ethernet Consortium. I didn't even know that. I would have expected like Cisco or Oracle or Broadcom or one of the telecommunications, the network giants, the network vendors that make network equipment like switches and routers. I thought one of those guys would be the founding member. But AMD is actually the founding member of the Ultra Ethernet Consortium. And then all these other companies, including Intel, have joined forces with AMD to be in this. Because the AMD guy, if you want to know more about this, I highly recommend that you watch Wendell's from Level 1 Tech's interview with AMD on this subject, because I talked about this last year, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but I remember what I told you guys at the time. I said that there's a war coming, and it's going to be NVIDIA versus everyone. That's basically what it is. Because this is basically everyone banding together. Now they've created this strategic alliance or consortium of member companies to basically resist NVIDIA's pull on the industry, on the networking industry. Because if NVIDIA has their way, they want to change the way networking, at least the layer 2 of the OSI model or the layer 2 of the TCP IP model works, such that it favors their AI accelerators and all the other things that they're doing with things like GeForce Now and a lot of that stuff on their switch fabric interface. They use a technology called InfiniBand. We've talked about this probably twice on 2 different live streams in the past. So NVIDIA uses InfiniBand, and they use this largely because it benefits their architectural design for how their GPUs in a virtualized cluster communicate across a layer 2 data plane network. They use something called InfiniBand, and that is a technology developed by an Israeli company called Mellanox, which, if you guys aren't aware, NVIDIA acquired that company a few years ago now. So, and that was basically the solidifying thing that basically made NVIDIA want to change networking, at least as much as they could, at least in the data center world, so that it would favor their technology. But everyone else opposed them because, and this includes the data centers themselves, because if they already have a switch fabric interconnect or ecosystem or architecture that uses Ethernet today, and it's been the same for like a decade plus, 20 years, who knows, however long that data center has been in business, why should they bend the knee to NVIDIA and change their entire infrastructure just because NVIDIA wants them to? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like NVIDIA's not their only customer. Come on now. Really? So this is the reason why now it's gotten to the point where the war has escalated so much that now you have companies that literally band together, and that includes competitors like AMD and Intel. They're literally on the same team now. You know, and Arista and Cisco and Broadcom, these guys are all competitors with each other in the networking space, and they're joining forces together. Like, this is a big deal. Microsoft and Meta and Oracle, those three are cloud providers that are competing with each other, and they're joining forces. So do you guys see how this is a big deal? You have network vendors joining forces, which are the top ones here. You have data center companies that are joining forces. Then you have chip makers that are joining forces. Like, literally everybody's teaming up against NVIDIA, which is basically why I said it's going to be NVIDIA versus everyone. And that's just how it is. And at the end of the day, remember what I said, guys? I said NVIDIA is going to lose. I said you don't see NVIDIA lose very often, but this is one war that they will lose. And I said this a year ago. And here we are, and NVIDIA finally bends the knee. NVIDIA bends the knee, and these guys win. But the fact that it took all of them to band together, it literally took Microsoft joining forces with all these giant companies and AMD to basically stop NVIDIA and make Jensen say, okay, you know what? Okay, we don't really need to do this. We don't really want to go down this road. So, okay, you win. And now NVIDIA's starting to develop software tools that work in conjunction with the Ethernet system. So they basically are forcing NVIDIA to redo how they think things through on their side versus have everybody else do it. So just to favor them. So that's a war that NVIDIA lost. So, okay, so that was the networking piece. I did want to touch on that because that is another thing that was a major, not really a major thing to people who don't really pay attention to the IT network space, but that's definitely a big one. But that just goes to show you guys how dominant NVIDIA has become, like how big and loud their presence is, their field presence. To use terminology from card games, NVIDIA has massive field presence right now. They have a huge advantage. Their field presence is enormous. So, now let's talk about, okay, so what have we discussed so far? We discussed this, we discussed this, we discussed that, we just did this. Cam 2. We'll touch on Cam 2 briefly. Cam 2 is a technology that I see really taking off in potentially the laptop space. I personally am not fully sold on this for desktop. I have seen the motherboards that use this instead of the typical DDR5 DIMM slots, but I don't think... they're going to have to redesign or rethink how motherboards are engineered. And I really think in the future, this is going to become the standard, especially with DDR6. So today, as you guys are aware, DDR5, because DDR5 runs at very high frequencies and also without active cooling and these sort of things, there are challenges. The trace lengths, the signal reflections, the signal absorption factors. There are so many things that are causing the challenges, if you will, with running DDR5 stable at higher densities and maintaining the advantage of those higher frequencies. So the Cam 2 could potentially address a lot of those problems. Now, one thing I want to point out, Snapdragon X Elite is supports DDR5 8400 megatransfers. So already Qualcomm is like I said earlier, guys, these guys are roaring in with like everything they've got. They're going They're going balls to the walls, just 100%. Let's go. 8400 mega transfers, DDR5. It's LP DDR5, I should say. LP DDR5. Let's go. LP DDR5, 8400 mega transfers. Let's go. What you got? I'm running 8400 on my RAM. What about you? See, that's what they're doing. They're doing it like that. That's it. They're doing that. How are you going to compete with this? Now, granted, the latency on this is probably like really, really bad. We're talking probably like cast latency like 56 or something or worse. But bigger numbers better. They're showing that off. So Cam 2 is going to allow, like, okay, G-Skill has Cam 2 at 7800 mega transfers, CL36. That's not that bad. That's actually pretty good. So that right there, and that's 48 gigabytes. So not the most density. That's not a ton of density. They've got that. So G-Skill has announced this. Now, here's what I think is going to make this really take off. You guys may have noticed, if you guys paid attention to the motherboard manufacturers at the show, BTF form factor motherboards were a thing. Now, here's what I think is going to happen. I think Cam 2 plus BTF is the future. Now, I could be completely wrong, but realistically, if we want Cam 2 to really take off, it means that and maintain the ATX form factor so that motherboards don't become ginormous, then we would need to adopt newer ways to take advantage of the real estate on the motherboard. And one way to do that is moving more things to the back of the motherboard. So I think moving the cable connections to the back of the motherboard is one thing that will allow Cam 2 memory standards to really take off. Because the problem with Cam 2 is if the most you can get is like 64 gigs of RAM or maybe 96 gigs of RAM, that's okay for the immediate future, but that's not okay once you start pushing core counts up and once you start pushing, like system requirements up long term, like 5 years from now, 7 years from now, like you're still not going to be on like 32 gigs of RAM in like 5 years. See, that's not how it works. So, this is the reason why AMD core counts have not really increased in the consumer space, because there isn't really much of a need to do that. And I'm going to prove that here by using Adobe's recommendations for system specifications. And this is how I've always built my own personal desktops. So, for the number, okay, core, how should I phrase this? For each core, RAM should have 4 gigabytes per core. For each CPU core, RAM should have 4 gigabytes per core. VRAM should have 1 gigabyte per core. This is the industry standard of how to build a balanced PC. Rule of thumb for building a balanced PC. There you go. These are the rules. Wait, what? I had bold on the whole time? Okay. For each CPU core, RAM should have 4 gigabytes per core. Let's do some example math to prove this rule. If I have a Ryzen 7 78. Let's use the new technology. A Ryzen 9700X Zen 5, because we're going to talk about Zen 5 next. If I have a Ryzen 7 9700X 8 core, I should have 8 times 4. I should have 8x4. So RAM equals 8 times 4 equals 32 gigabyte RAM. This is a balanced system. VRAM should equal 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, keep in mind, these are minimum spec. This is minimum spec. So it's okay to go above this. It's okay to do more than this. But this is the minimum spec for an 8-core CPU. This is why you guys see me build PCs. That's why people have to be like, why do you have a PC with so much RAM? Well, because that's how you build a balanced PC. You don't want... The problem is... So let's do another example and it'll become more clear. Let's do the Ryzen 9 9950X. This is a 16 core. So RAM should equal 16 times 4, which would be 64 gigabytes of RAM. The VRAM should equal 16 gigabytes of VRAM, 1 per core. The reason why we do this is because we want to decrease the what do I call it? What is the word, man? We want to decrease the rate of contesting for resources by the cores or something like that. What is the word? Not contested. Basically, we don't want the cores competing for the same resources. We want them to have access to memory when they need it, and we want them to have the utilization of the VRAM when they need it per core, per workload. So, this is how you build. This is the reason why the cost of a PC increases quite, like, not exponentially, but not linearly. It increases quite a bit as you go up the performance stack. So, like, if you're building an 8-core system, you really only need at today's standards, you really only need 32 gigs of RAM. But if you're building a 16-core system, like a Ryzen 9 system, you really shouldn't be using 32 gigs of RAM because why can't I figure out what the word I'm going to use? The rate at which the resources are contested by the cores goes up. So that's the reason why when you look at like Adobe, for example, if you go to Adobe's website and you look at system requirements for Adobe Premiere, After Effects, all their different software applications, they're going to list requirements and system recommendations based off of this exact rule. They're going to literally have this written in their documentation. See, I'm not making this up. The thing is, I'm literally not making this up. This is like an industry standard for building like workstations or content creation based machines. Who said 32 gigabytes is not enough? Do most people need 16 cores? No, they don't. The same reason why most people don't need 64 gigs of RAM. Most people shouldn't be buying a 16-core CPU. The use case for this, it's designed for certain workloads versus this. So that's the reason why the higher core count, that's why the pricing's different, right? Like, it scales in a weird way. Like, this, I would guess, is going to be like $350 to $400. This is probably going to be like a $700 CPU. $650 to $700 at launch. if I had to guess. Now, AMD hasn't announced pricing yet, but I'm guessing that that's what the prices are going to be. Because I think MSRP for Zen 5 is not changing from Zen 4. Which means this at launch will probably be $700. And this will probably be $399 or $400 at launch. But who knows? Maybe the Ryzen 7 could be $360, $380, somewhere in there, $350. And I think the Ryzen 5 will be probably like $280 to $300, if I had to guess. So I could be completely wrong on the Ryzen 5 and the Ryzen 7, because they may... It remains to be seen like how those chips perform. But I will say they have significantly lower TDP compared to the Zen 4 counterparts. They have no incentive to lower MSRP considering the main. Yeah, they weren't even priced that high, to be honest. Like, okay, the Ryzen 9s are expensive, but rightfully so, because, you know, those are meant for more higher-end spec-based computers. Like, someone's not going to take this and pair it with, like, 24 gigs of RAM or 32 gigs of RAM. If they are, they're building an unbalanced PC, and they just don't know it. That's called ignorance. And sometimes ignorance is bliss. Most games don't even need more than 16 gigabyte on NVIDIA GPU. So are we saying that 8 gigabytes of VRAM is enough? There's no incentive. AM4, considering how good AM4 was. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, like Zen 3 is still alive. Like they're launching a 8-core and a 16-core. It's interesting. Notice how I've conveniently used these 8-core and 6-core examples. Notice that, because there is also the same rule applies. The Ryzen 7 50, what was the number? 50, is it 50? Oh, 5700 XT? No, wait, 5800 XT. 5800 XT. And the Ryzen 9 5900 XT. 16 core and 8 core. Look at that. They've got new Zen 3 parts. They got new AM4 CPUs in 2024. You need like 12 gigabytes for 1440p, 16 gigabytes. No, you don't. Do you really? Maybe in a few games. Not really. Most games you can play at 4K with less than 16 gigs. But let's put it this way. I would consider 16 gigs of VRAM the minimum spec for 4K. So, but yeah, like if you're gaming at 4K, you should have a 16 gigabyte GPU. Anything lower than that is considered like below minimum spec for 4K. Because 4K gaming, I have seen some games they don't use that much VRAM, but usually those are older games. I can give you guys an example. Like Final Fantasy 14, that game uses like 4.5 to 6 gigs of VRAM at 4K resolution. So but that's a really old game. That game's from, it's a DX11 game. And the DX11 client is from 2015. Now, I'd have to go back and test. The new game, the new expansion is going to improve the graphics. So it might use more. It might use like 6.5 to 7 gigs of VRAM at 4K. But still, that's like way lower than what you would need, right? Like for modern games. But yeah, in general, for 4K, you need a 16 gigabyte GPU. So that is the reason why. Okay, but see, here's the thing, guys. Notice how I apply this logic to every computer I build. So now let's use my Threadripper computer as an example. Threadripper 7960X. This is 24 cores. So using that logic, I'm running out of room here. Using that logic, RAM should equal 24 times 4. What does that equal? 96 gigabytes. Which means my Threadripper computer, at minimum, should have 96 gigs of RAM. Now, I personally am running 128 gigs of RAM because I'm running 4 sticks of DDR5 at 6400 on Threadripper, and it's quad channel, so you're going to be doing like 32 gig, times 4. But minimum, the lowest amount of RAM that a Threadripper should have on the lowest end Threadripper, which is what I have, which is a 24 core, 48 thread, that should have minimum 96 gigabytes of memory. Now, what does that mean for VRAM? VRAM on my personal Threadripper should be no less than, you guessed it, 24 gigabytes of RAM. Yes, Threadripper. Now you guys see why NVIDIA loves Threadripper. NVIDIA loves Threadripper because they know that if someone's trying to build a cheap HEDT / a workstation on the cheap, they're trying to be sophisticated and get a really good deal. That means that literally the cheapest current generation NVIDIA graphics card for Threadripper is the RTX 4090. This is the reason why the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more... That is the reason why I have the 4090 now in my Threadripper. The alternative is the RX 7900 XTX. So for the longest time, I was using the 7900 XTX with my Threadripper. But I recently have now swapped. My RTX 4090 is now paired up with my Threadripper. I changed it. I took out the XTX because I figured, you know what? The XTX reference graphics card should be readily available to benchmark if I'm going to be doing game comparisons or CPU benchmarks, because guess what, guys? Zen 5 is coming soon. And I realized something. I'm going to have to benchmark Zen 5 against Zen 4 and the Intel Raptor Lake and maybe some older CPUs to show people, especially even older CPUs, because I want people to see a lot of what I see in the industry is people will take the previous generation and they'll compare it to the latest generation. And that's fine, but what about someone who hasn't upgraded in 5 years? What if someone still has a 7-year-old CPU or a 5-year-old CPU? What if someone's on a Ryzen 3000 or a Ryzen 2000? Or an Intel Coffee Lake, like an 8700K. What about those people? How did they stack up to the Zen 5? So the thing is, you guys already know me. I don't use the 4090 because I want to minimize the amount of times for benchmarking, comparing CPUs. And the reason why I don't do that is because I don't disconnect the power connector that often. So the few times that I migrate this card between systems, it has to be very strategic. I think I've disconnected my 4090 probably like 6 or 7 times now from the actual connector on the GPU itself. So to me, that's a high number of disconnect cycles. So I can't use the 4090 for benchmarking CPUs. It's a no-go. I put it at risk of melting the connector. So it's like, yeah, I'm just going to put it in Threadripper, and it can just live its life in the Threadripper as a workstation GPU, and that's what it will do for the rest of its life until, you know, it gets replaced by something newer. So that's why my GPU that I'm going to be using for benchmark comparisons will be the 7900 XTX AMD reference card design. So that one. So that one is now in the box, ready to go. When the Zen 5 comes out, this is what we're going to be comparing it to. Now, the other GPU, which means the X3D no longer uses the 4090. For the X3D, it's going to have to use like XTX or something else. Now, the other GPU, the only other GPU that I could put in Threadripper, and once upon a time it was in there, was the RTX 3090 Ti. And I considered putting the RTX 3090 Ti in there because I have another GPU in that machine. I have a Radeon W7500. So I have Radeon Pro W7500. This is like the cheapest AMD professional workstation graphics card. This card sits in my Threadripper system as an AV1 encode / decode, or HEVC or AVC encode decode. It is so good at just sitting there and not using any energy. It is a single slot GPU. It's super thin, it's flat, and it's less than 70 watts. So it doesn't even need a PCIe power connector at all. And that's the reason why I use it with my Threadripper. So because of that, I could technically pair this up with the RTX 3090 Ti, because the 3090 Ti is 24 gigs of VRAM, which matches the number of cores for Threadripper. So I could do that, like build that and put 3090 Ti to work again. But the problem is that card uses a ton of power, and Threadripper itself uses a lot of power when under load. So Threadripper plus 3090 Ti, we're talking like, what is that? Like 450 on the 3090 Ti plus 300 watts on the Threadripper. That's like 750 watts of power. My power supply is a 1200 watt Corsair HX series, so the power supply is fine. But you can see why I was like, it's really going to be between these two. And I want this to be the GPU that I can swap, because I don't have to worry about the power connectors melting. So that's why it is what it is. What? You were disappointed that we didn't get... I told you we weren't getting one. I said that was not going to happen. We would have gotten one like 3 months ago if that was going to happen. So we already missed the boat on that. Let's put it this way. When the Super Series was announced, that would have been the time to get the 4090 Ti. Because the 4090 Ti did not launch a Super, that was the end of that. Like, I knew at that moment that there was no 4090 Ti for consumer. So... the 5080 is the 4090 Ti Super. Are you sure about that? You do realize they have a new generation. Blackwell is a thing. It's not going to be a rebrand. But yeah, this is... that's how I build PCs. So anytime I build a 16 core, it's got to have 64 gigs of RAM minimum by today's standards. But I always oversize my systems, as you guys know. Like, they're always... well, except the GPU. The GPU is within spec, although the 8 cores are on bigger memory capacities. My VRAM... the average VRAM I'm running on an 8 core is like 16 gigs. 16 to 20 gigs. Okay. So, What else? I think I covered everything. We talked about the Cam 2. We covered, oh, yeah. AMD, Zen 5. Okay, delete all this. Running out of space. Let's delete this Lunar Lake stuff. Okay, so the last thing, I guess, would be, oh yeah, X870E and X870. So really, you know, I was thinking, I'm not sure what exactly is going to be different besides the whole USB 4 thing. Let me find the Tech Power Up had a decent article about this. Oh, their website is so full of like all this. Okay, here it is. Okay. So here it is, guys. We can see the entire lineup, or the chipset differences here. So if we look at this, X870E has basically everything, and then X870 has the same thing, except it has less lanes. It actually has less lanes. Or I don't know how it has less lanes. I'm trying to understand. Oh, that's right. Okay, so here's the thing. I learned something recently about X870. So the difference between X870E, there's actually a larger difference between X870E and X870. Apparently, X870 is going to be a single chipset. So this is a single chipset. The second one here, X870. Whereas X870E is going to be a dual chipset, just like X670E and X670. Now, previously, X670E and X670 were using literally the exact same chipset. The difference was that X670E had more PCI Gen 5, whereas X670 had like 4 lanes or something like that. Or it had like an M.2. So if we go back to Paint here, I guess we can delete all of this stuff over here. We covered Computex. This is kind of related, but let's delete that. I need more space. I need a lot of space for this. Delete all of this. So on an okay. You have the CPU, you have the chipset, and then you had like another chipset. Just to reiterate this was a Prom 21. We won't use the internal name because I don't want to confuse people. I'm just going to say B650 because it's literally a B650, and this is a B650. Although maybe I shouldn't use that because that might confuse people further. So an X670 is basically 2 B650s daisy chained together. That is X670. This is what X670 was. It was basically 2 of these wired together and then up to the CPU. This is the AM5. So, meaning, if you bought an X670 motherboard, you literally bought a motherboard that had 2 B650 chipsets on it. That's all that is. So, if you wanted X670E, the only difference, so the X670 and the X670E are actually identical. The only difference is that the PCI Gen 5 bus to the CPU on the X670, it had two. It had PCIe 5 with 24 lanes, and it had PCIe... No, wait. We're talking X670. PCIe 4 X20, I think. And then this one, PCIe 5.0 X4. This was X670. What you see here is X670. This is current generation. So, what is an X670E? So now, if I make X670E, the only difference is, this is E, I have PCIe 5.0 X24. I have, over here, nothing. Because all the lanes are Gen 5. That's the difference. That is the only difference between PCIe, or between X670E and X670. This is the only difference. This stays exactly the same, which means if you bought X670E, your physical chipset is still two B650s, and if you bought X670, it's still two B650s. The thing that changes is the CPU lanes. The CPU lanes on X670E all run at Gen 5. Whereas on an X670, only 4 of the lanes run at Gen 5. The remaining 20 lanes run at Gen 4 on regular X670. That is the difference. Now, someone's asking, what about B650E? Okay, B650E is... Well, you already know what it is. I have to delete a lot of this. B650E is this. So B650 is PCIe 4.0 X20. And, well, okay, you know what? Since I've used PCI 5 on the left, we'll just keep that consistent. PCI 5 X4. PCI Gen 4 X20. This is a B650 motherboard. Now, keep in mind, I'm not showing you guys the lanes. There are lanes down here as well. We didn't list those earlier, but for those that are curious, we have this and we have this. There. There are all your lanes. If you want to see the total lane count, there's your total lane count. And I have not shown any USB. All that USB stuff is also still in here. So, this is a B650 motherboard. Now, what happens if I want to make a B650E motherboard? The only difference is all of these 20 lanes up here are PCI Gen 5. That's the only difference between B650 and B650E, which means the key takeaway is the E for extreme means all your CPU lanes are Gen 5. That's the only difference between the B650E and the X670E and the regular X670 and B650. Now, let's go back now and discuss the new motherboards because things change here, but not really. So, one of the things that change, which I'm having trouble understanding. Okay, now it makes sense. Okay, so now I got it. So they have a new one down here, B840. I've never heard of that. They actually have a... Oh, that's the A20. Okay, so notice the lane counts in here. Gen 4, X12, Gen 3, X8, blah, blah, blah. Those are what I just drew on the board for the chipset. So, okay, so let's explain now what is X870E and X870. Because now I know exactly what they are after glancing at that. Okay, so now let's talk about... Here, let's erase this, whatever. So now let's say we have X870. X870 is that. That's it, X870. 8 Gen 4, 4 Gen 3. Yeah, that's it. Oh, wait, is the PEG slot? Oh, okay, hold on. Yeah. Okay. So this... That's wrong, and this is also different. So this is 24. That's all that changes. Okay, now I know why I should have used a different name instead of B650 in here. We're going to have to use the Prom 21, because that's the name. Promontory is the name of the chip. Prom 21. That's Promontory 21. That's the generation. And that's why on Tech Power Ups thing, that's why notice how it says P21. P21 plus P... At the very bottom row, they've got P21, 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 P19. That stands for Promontory 21. That is the name of the chip on the motherboard. Which means that the chipset is actually the same chipset as X670. Notice how they say P21 plus P21. That indicates dual chipset. Remember how I said two B650s daisy-chained? It's actually two Prom 21s, or P21s daisy-chained. So that's what that means. Okay, so this is an X870 board. So an X870 board is just a B650E in disguise. So X870 is B650E rebranded. That's another way to look at this. With mandatory USB 4 via the ASM 4242, or is it 2424? I think it's 4242. There you go. That is an X870. So this is an X870 board. It is a rebranded B650E with mandatory USB 4. So now if we go back and look here at the Tech Power Up chart, check this out. Look at the second column. X870. CPU overclock, yes. Now let's look over at B650E. B650E says yes. Yes. Gen 5, Gen 5. The Gen 4 8 plus Gen 3 X4. It is identical, and it even has the same Promontory 21 chipset, P21 chipset for both. It means it is the exact same chipset. The only difference is right here. On board, USB 4. X870 says yes. B650E says optional. The only motherboard... There is a B650E motherboard that includes USB 4. That motherboard is the ASRock B650E Tai Chi. So, there you go. Let's look at that one real quick. ASRock Taichi B650E. ASRock Taichi B650E. Where is it? Wait for it. 1 USB 4 Type-C. There you go. On a B650E Taichi. 24 lanes of PCI Gen 5. There it is. Look at the Thunderbolt logo right there. That USB-C port is actually a Thunderbolt 4 / Thunderbolt 3 / USB 4 interface, which supports PCIe tunneling and everything. So there you go. This is a motherboard from the year 2022 that had USB 4 on an AMD motherboard. Thunderbolt 4, by the way, on an AMD motherboard. This motherboard features the Intel JHL8540 Thunderbolt 4 chipset. So it has full compatibility. There you go. One port. So the difference is the X870 will be identical to this specific board, except it will have another Thunderbolt 4 port. It'll have 2 USB 4 ports as opposed to 1 USB 4 port. So that'll be the main difference. And on top of that, it will also add Wi-Fi 7. The new motherboard, the X870, will have Wi-Fi 7, whereas the B650E, because it's from 2022, it has Wi-Fi 6E. So that is the one other difference. So if you're buying new, if you're someone who's going to AM5 for the first time, I would recommend X870 or X870E over the older B650. Well, B650 is different because that one is getting a refresh. But X670, X670E, if I personally was buying next month, if I was upgrading next month and I was never on AM5 previously, I would go with the newer X870. I would ignore the X670 and just go straight for the newest generation, because you're getting the newer stuff. You're getting Wi-Fi 7. You're getting the ASM 40 gigabit. You're getting dual 40 gigabit USB 4 mandatory, even on the cheapest motherboard. Like the X870, which is a B650E. You're still getting all the PCI Gen 5. You're probably going to get better memory overclocking because, come on now, it's newer motherboards. The motherboard manufacturers have figured out better ways to optimize the trace layouts for the RAM. So you're most likely going to be hitting, like 8,000, 8,400, 9,600 mega transfers on these newer motherboards more reliably, more easily than on the older boards. So things like that are probably reasons to consider the newer chipset. But if you're on AM5 today, like HDZ is on Crosshair Hero, yeah, you don't need to change the motherboard. Your motherboard already has dual USB 4. Your motherboard fits the category of, if we go back here, notice how it says X670E onboard USB 4. Notice how it says the word optional. Optional. Yours happens to be one that included the option for USB 4. But several didn't have that. Several didn't choose to include it. Now, X870, the nice thing about making it mandatory is that the average buyer who doesn't even know what USB 4 does, they blindly choose the cheapest X870 motherboard that they can get, and they magically have USB 4. And someday, who knows, they decide to plug in an external 4K capture card into that, what they think is a USB-C port, but it's actually a USB 4 port, and it works totally fine with full bandwidth. So, stuff like that, they don't have to worry about it. I like to say it's better to have something and not need it than to not have something when you actually need it. I live by that philosophy. So, yeah, that's why I would opt for the newer boards if I was going to buy now. What if you're getting 7800X3D instead? Yes, I still would. Yes. Even if I was buying last generation at a discounted price, I would still buy the newer motherboard. And I would use the older CPU with the newer motherboard. Nero saying, always get the latest chipset, even if you're getting an older CPU. Yeah, exactly. Think about all the people who bought Intel's 12th gen Alder Lake and paired it up with a Z790 instead of a Z690. Technically speaking, 12th gen Intel is supposed to be paired with Z690, not Z790. But it works with the newer motherboard. Same thing with the AMD. The Zen 4 was designed to go with X670. That doesn't mean you can't pair it up with the newer X870. Are you going to do a full new build? No, I'm going to do an upgrade. I'm just going to do a drop-in upgrade. I'll do the live stream. You guys will see me doing the CPU socket swap live. I think I'm going to do it live. Well, it depends. Since it's not a full new build, I don't know if I am going to do it live. I mean, I'm going to film it regardless. I'm going to unbox the processor and put it in the motherboard. And show how to install it in the CPU and how to put the correct thermal paste. And all that stuff. You don't need anything beyond X670E. I don't agree with that statement. I don't believe that. No. If I was buying new, I'd recommend X870 or X870E. The other thing, too, is you guys have to remember these motherboards will ship day one with support for Zen 5. These older motherboards that are sitting on store shelves or sitting in a Newegg or an Amazon warehouse most likely are probably sitting on older BIOSes that don't have support for Zen 5. Meaning, if you choose to buy an older motherboard and put a Zen 5 CPU in it, like a Ryzen 9950X, for example, you're going to have to do BIOS flashback before you can even get it up and running. So that's an extra step that you'd have to do that you would completely bypass and ignore if you were to buy the newer motherboard. And even if you were buying it with a 7800X3D, these newer motherboards still support the older Zen 4s right out of the box. So, no, I would definitely advocate for the next generation chipset. Or the next generation motherboard. We still don't even know, like, how much has been improved in terms of memory overclocking. The fact that AMD is declaring 8000 as an Expo profile, that is very telling of higher memory speeds with more that are more accessible to the average user. Now, I've already shown and proven multiple times now that 8000 on Zen 4 is pretty easy to do. You don't need a fancy 2-DIMM expensive motherboard to do it. You only need like a $200 or even less motherboard, a 4-DIMM motherboard, you know, the cheapest one, whatever you can get, and you can run 8000 megatransfers on any random Zen 4 CPU all the way down to a Ryzen 5 7600, and it'll work fine. So now AMD is saying that Expo 8000 is a thing for Zen 5. I mean, I have it working on Zen 4. I mean, I have it working on like 2 CPUs literally right now, and it works fine. I can live stream all day and run multiple things and nothing crashes. So, and I've proven that it works. Now, what I am more curious to see, though, is what is going to be the top-end target speed for RAM. I'm thinking right now it's probably going to be 9600. So, let's go back to Paint here. So where I have said the speeds for Zen 4 speeds were 6000, let's say Zen 4 RAM speeds were 6000 megatransfers gear 1 or 8000 megatransfers gear 2. I'm not going to take time to explain why this is true because I have many videos on this topic already. So if you want to understand why this is the rule of law for Zen 4 RAM speeds, go watch those videos. Now, for Zen 5, RAM speeds are changing. The target speeds will change depending on A couple of things. One, obviously the memory controller. Two, the motherboard. That's why I want you guys, that's why I'm recommending pair it up with the newer motherboard. It's like saying, like telling somebody to buy the X670 for Zen 5 is like telling somebody to buy a Z690 motherboard for a 14900K. That's the same logic. So, no. So, anyway, the RAM speeds for Zen 5 are going to depend on the F clock. So, for Gear 2, the F clock speed matters. For Gear 1, the U clock ratio to RAM speed matters. So, we don't know what the Gear 1 top out is going to be. But I will say, for all intents and purposes, 9600 MTS. I am making a declaration today, and we will see if I'm proven wrong or right when Zen 5 shows up. But I'm going to go ahead and go on the record and say that the Gear 2 target speed to aim for on Zen 5 will be 9600 megatransfers Gear 2 speed. Now, the Gear 1, I don't know. This one is the great mystery. I don't know that number. It could still be 6,000. Who knows? That will depend on how the memory controller improves. But I personally am going to aim for 9600 megatransfers on Zen 5 Gear 2 mode, and we'll see how that does. Now, that is going to become a challenge because we're going to need to source DDR5 RAM that can handle this speed. And the other limiting factor is, who knows? Maybe my X670E motherboard can't handle 9600 megatransfers. Maybe the BIOS won't even let me program the memory multiplier to that speed. So, you know, that is another reason why the newer motherboards are justified for these upgrades. Pretty sure I saw 10,000 at Computex. Yeah, but 10,000 is not a number. That's not a target number for this. That's beyond that's way outside the overclock spec. But yeah, that's fine. I mean, you can do that. 7,200 is a sweet spot. Where'd you get that from? Oh, you know where that could come from? You know what that means? If that's true, that could be true if the U clock can run at 3.6 gigahertz. Remember, these numbers, people are probably sitting here like, how does he know this? Like, how does he know this is true? Well, it's all because of this one, U clock equals M clock. This one, U clock equals F clock. That's all you need to know. That's how we derive this. So, in this one, U clock equals M clock. U clock equals F clock. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you... So, this is where you derive these from. So, you just plug in the numbers and you figure out that's the target speed. It makes a lot of sense. Oh, for Cam 2. Yeah, Cam 2 is different because the latency is a lot better. But yeah, like this is how we derive it, guys. Like, look. So, in this first scenario, what does this equal? 3,000 megahertz. What does this one equal? 2,000 megahertz. So in this one. So, okay, let's use your hypothetical 7200 as an example. So, if we say... Now I have to erase my question marks. If we... I'm going to put this one in, like, purple because I don't really believe it. So, hypothetically, if we say, for example, for educational purposes, if 7200 megatransfers becomes the new magic number for Gear 1, that means my target M clock needs to be 3600 megahertz. Now, Gear 2, what would that be, guys? $2,400. Do you know why? Now do you guys understand where I'm deriving 9600 from? The rumored F clock. The rumored F clock speed. That's where it comes from. See, I can back up my numbers. All my videos are based off of actual, like, understanding of the architecture. The 7200 thing, I don't know where that comes from, but if that's true, that means that the memory controller and the RAM has to run at 3.6, a whopping 3.6 gigahertz. So that means that is 600 megahertz faster than the old 3000 of Zen 4. That is what that means. But if the fabric truly runs at 2400 megatransfers or 2400 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, if this is a true statement, and this, for all intents and purposes, at this point we pretty much know that this is almost confirmed as true because the 8700G can do this. And that's Zen 4.5. And I think we've heard multiple rumors now, and I feel like I've watched some of those YouTube videos from Computex where some of those guys were talking about like F clocks like 2400. As soon as I heard 2400, I was like, okay, that's in line with what people were doing on 8700G, which means if that's new F clock, this is my new target. 9600 megatransfers is my new goal for the DDR5 speeds. That's where it's coming from, because it's the fabric clock. It's derived from fabric. And how do you get that? You're in Gear 2. So you take U clock and you divide the M clock in half. But you want it to equal F clock so that you have a 1-to-1 synchronization between memory controller and fabric, so they run the same speed, so you have like seamless data transfer across that I/O die. There's no weird buffering and signaling and all this other stuff that's happening. You eliminate that from the equation, so you get net increase in throughput and frequency across the board. So we'll see what happens. Like, I still don't know what the Gear 1 target will be. But, you know, if they're doing 3.6 gigahertz on a memory controller, that is amazing. I don't know if that's going to be true, though. Because to me, I don't think... Here's the thing. I don't know if this is true. So that's why I'm calling this out in purple, because I don't believe this until I see something that proves it otherwise. I believe this. I stand by this. I don't stand by this, because I can't prove that. And the reason why I can't prove that is because nowhere in anything that AMD has indicated that they have improved the memory controller, or not the memory controller, the I/O die. It's still on the same node. So whatever changes they made to the fabric to make the fabric go faster, who knows? Maybe the IMC goes faster. But remember, 3.6 gigahertz on a uncore part is significantly faster than 2.4 on a fabric. So that's like, you know, that's much faster. So I don't know if that's true. But we'll keep this for now as kind of a general guide going forward. The other difference is the X870 and X870E have more power stages. I didn't know about that. Where did you hear that from? Oh, you're talking about the VRM? Is that just VRM stuff? I don't even know. Is that really necessary when the Ryzen 7s only pull like 65 watts stock? Anyway, I think this is mostly accurate. I mean, I don't know if this is true. I mean, I can kind of get behind the idea of 6400 being the new Gear 1, because 6400 is what, 64, that's 32, so 3200 megahertz, like a 200 megahertz improvement over 3 gigahertz. I feel like that is believable. So maybe 6400 and 9600 are the new numbers, but who knows? We'll find out soon, though. It's not that much longer to wait. MSI ASRock. Yeah, we'll see. I think this is a decent... This is what's surprising about this. Remember, guys, like I said earlier, one of the general themes of Computex was power efficiency. And we're clearly seeing that with at least the lower end of the stack, Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7. These Zen 5 parts, the 6-core, the 8-core, they're only 65 watt. Which means they're not going to run very hot. Which also means that they're going to be fun to overclock. They're going to be fun to overclock. I would not be surprised if that's what AMD's going for. Like they're like, here it is. You know, it's like 15 to 20% faster than the previous one. But if you overclock it, man, you can probably put like a 65 watt part. You can probably overclock it by a decent margin, considering the previous generation was like 105 watt TDP stock. And the socket can pull like 230. So you can probably get that thing up to like 125 watt, like an Intel Power Level 1 stage. You can overclock the Ryzen to like 125 watt, like essentially double the power consumption and get probably a sizable uplift. Maybe not a huge uplift, because I feel like they've probably tuned these to be in the middle of the energy efficiency curve. But it'll be interesting to play around with. Those chips, I think, are going to be way more fun to play around. And they're going to be on a more mature memory controller, so overall, and hit higher memory speed. So I think the Zen 5 stuff will be an interesting new tech toy to play around with this summer when those come out. Especially the single CCDs. How much VRAM and RAM for the i5? How many cores? Like what, 14 or something? It's 14 core, right? I don't know. Probably like, you'd probably do like 32 gig. Oh, you're talking about RAM? VRAM is gonna be, like I said earlier, the answers are on the answers are literally on the slide. The answers are on the stream. Read the slide. I keep saying it's like it's a PowerPoint slide. Read the screen. There's your answer. For the person asking about the Intel, how much RAM for the i5? Look at this. You tell me. I give you the answer here. You just derive the answer from this. Okay. Yeah, to be honest, I don't think the motherboards are that impressive compared to the previous generation. One thing that surprised me was that there weren't really that many interesting motherboards shown off in general. Did you guys notice that? Like, don't you guys feel like the motherboards that they showed off were kind of underwhelming? Here, let's look at some of these. So here's one. This is called the Tai Chi Lite. This is the X870E Tai Chi Lite. It's basically the Tai Chi without a lot of the RGB. So I like that it has the postcode. One thing I will say, more of these motherboards actually had the postcode debug on them. So I feel like maybe some of them watched some of my videos where I complained about the lack of postcode debug on pretty much like all the brands, unless you wanted to pay like $350 for a B650E. Oh, fun fact, guess what, guys? Remember, since we just said that X870 is basically B650E all over again with mandatory USB 4, which means you can expect, we now know, we can accurately predict the price point of these motherboards. So what that means, X870 is going to be in the $300 to $400 range. I project that X870 will be the $300-ish motherboards. So this motherboard here, for example, not to use this one because this one is an E. But let's look for an X870. Like, which one's an X870? I can barely even tell. This one. That's a great picture. Yeah, that shows me a lot. Okay, this one is probably gonna be like a 300. This is gonna be like a $300 motherboard right here. Great picture, guys. And then this one is the Steel Legend. So the Steel Legend, X870 Steel Legend. This one, I'm just looking at it. This one probably is like a $300 motherboard. Yeah, it's got a lot of RGB. It has a lot of USB on the back. I see USB 4. There's your USB 4. Not this one. Oh yeah, right here. See, one USB 4, two USB 4. There you go. Remember what I said earlier? Every single X870 and X870E will have dual USB 4 on the back. There you go. USB 4, USB 4. The more you buy, the more you save. All right, check this one out. USB 4, USB 4. They've all got USB 4 on them. USB 4, USB 4. Just like the Crosshair Hero. They all have, and these are like way cheaper than the Crosshair Hero too. This Tai Chi, where's the Tai Chi itself? Here's the Tai Chi. Is this a Tai Chi? No, that's the Phantom Gaming. Where's the Tai Chi? This is the Tai Chi. This is the flagship, guys. This is the most expensive ASRock. Wait, is it? I thought they had one with water cooling or something. Okay, maybe that was some other brand. So this one is the most expensive board. This one is the $500 board. This is the big boy. $500, $499 for this motherboard. It's got USB 4. It has 24 lanes of CPU connected direct PCIe 5.0. It has all that good stuff. It's got a bunch of Gen 5 drives. It has a bunch of Gen 5 PEG slot PCIe. So this is the $500 board. I'm going to go ahead and guess the price of this is $499. That is the most expensive ASRock X870E motherboard. You got postcode debug up here in the top right. So you're not left in the dark if you're trying to troubleshoot some problem. You have the quick disconnect for the GPU over here. You've got a Gen 5 M.2 right there. You got a way more M.2 somewhere hidden under here. All this stuff. You got M.2 right here on the right. This is a Gen 5 next to the RAM, just like on the MSI Ace. It is worth pointing out that this is a big boy motherboard. This is an eATX. This is not an ATX. So, if you're building a workstation, this is an excellent motherboard for a consumer desktop workstation. But just know that this is an eATX, so you would need a case that can fit an extended ATX board. I like this one. This one is the Nova. This one's got a postcode debug on it. It is an X870E. I have no idea what this is going to cost. If I had to guess, this is going to be like $400, $420, something like that, $430. Every time I see these postcodes, I have PTSD and think that they're going to be like $500 boards. But then I'm thinking, well, if the Tai Chi's $500, then this thing's going to be less. So this one's probably going to be like $450, $400 at the low end. Definitely over $400 though. This is definitely over $400. This one. This is probably... This is a 350... No. This is less than 350. This should be like 320, 319, 329, somewhere in there. That's what I'm saying. The Steel Legend got downgraded. It used to be a X. This one used to be an E. Now it's like a B650E. So this one is basically a $300. Yeah, Steel Legend always was like $300, even as X670E. This might actually be like less than $300, guys. This might be a good one. This might be like $250. This might be like a $250 board. Or, well, it's X870. That doesn't really matter, though. This is probably like a $250 to $300, if I had to guess. This one is a $300 board. So that's how I classify them. The Tai Chi has 27 power stages at 110. Yeah, that one's the $500 board. Yeah, that one's $500. So this one's as much as the Aorus Master, for those wondering. Those quick releases they're putting on these boards would save quite a bit. Yeah, they do. I like the Tai Chi. How many of them have that? See, that the lower end ones don't have that. Wait, hold up. So the Tai Chi Lite doesn't have that? Only the big Tai Chi has it? Okay, wait, the Nova has it. The Nova has it. Okay, hold on. That means that the Nova is going to cost more than the Tai Chi Lite, because the Nova has the quick disconnect. See, look at that. This is how you can figure it out. You got to know how to use your detective skills to deduce how much these things are going to cost, so you can budget accordingly. Like if you're someone doing a new build this summer and you're going to try to save money for some of these motherboards, you got to know where they're going to land price-wise. This one, I can tell you right now, $500. Like I can tell you right now with very high confidence, this is $500. Why? Because I already know that the launch price of the X670E Tai Chi was actually a little bit more than $500. It was like $529. But this one I declare at $499. And that's the most expensive one. That's the one that's got everything. It has postcode debug. It has insane Gen 5 connectivity, M.2, USB 4, quick disconnect, 6 SATA, blah, 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 all this stuff. It's got everything fully loaded, right? It's got everything. It's missing nothing. All right, then we've got the Nova. This is the second most expensive. So if this one's Frieza, this one's Captain Ginyu. This is number 2, second strongest. Okay, here we go. The Nova, it has the postcode debug. It has the quick release. It basically has everything that the Tai Chi has, except it probably has a lower end VRM and less RGB. Although it looks like it's got a pretty decent amount. It's got a fancy infinity mirror gimmick over here on the side. So, you know, this is the second most expensive board. Okay, then we've got this guy, the Phantom Gaming. No debug, which automatically, like, okay, this is how you guys are probably wondering, like, how does he know in what ballpark they're priced? I can tell you this. If it's X870E and it has postcode, it's going to be minimum like $430 to $450. I can tell you that right now. That's just basic understanding of how the world works. Okay? Next, we've got Phantom Gaming. Phantom Gaming, the first thing I noticed, no postcode debug. That automatically means this thing cannot be more expensive than like $350. So this one, I see X870. That means it's a B650E. That means it's going to be no more than $350 and has no postcode. So that drops it down to like $300. I'm going to go ahead and say this one, $299. This is a $300 board. You got 4 SATA. You got, notice how the M.2 has less, but it still has all the heat sinks. So, all right, then we got Steel Legend. This one is $300. Again, it might actually be less. This might be like $270, $260, somewhere in there, but I think it's going to be more than $250. So this one's going to be priced very similar to the old Gigabyte Aorus Elite. This looks like an Aorus Elite. Okay, and I think that covers it. So, and the Tai Chi Lite, this one has postcode. It's the flagship chipset. It doesn't have the quick disconnect. This one I'm gonna say is like $420, somewhere in there. Maybe $400, maybe $399. ASRock usually has good value, so this one might be $420, $419. I'm going to go ahead and say $419. All right, that's ASRock. So X870 MSI. Let's see if they got one for MSI. Is it this one? Okay, MSI. MSI didn't show a whole lot. Like, they didn't show the Carbon. They didn't show the Ace. They didn't really show much of anything, really. I think MSI showed off the Cam 2. The Cam 2 board. But just looking at this, Tomahawk has a postcode. Magically. They brought it back. What is this, though? Is this an X870 or an X870E? Because let me tell you guys, the difference between an X870 with a postcode versus an X870E with a postcode is in the ballpark of $150. So just saying that right now, the difference is like anywhere from like $50 to $150. But the Tomahawk, you know, that's actually really good placement. This is the best placement for the postcode debug. Speaking from personal experience, because I keep my computer on the desk, on the floor, and when I look over at it to see, like when it's booting up, I can't see my postcode debug unless I like lean way over to see it. But if it was lower down, because on mine the postcode is way up here at the top, if it was lower down, I could actually see it without having to like bend my neck and look like way over. So this is actually the best placement for it. It's down here is dumb because it's usually covered up by the GPU so you can't see it. But like up here is perfect. Like right above the 24 pin. Is the 9950X 3D to... we have no idea. Well, it's going to be dual CCD. We know it's dual CCD, but we don't know... If you're asking if both CCDs have the 3D V-Cache, we don't know that. That's coming out like... probably 6-7 months from now, so I wouldn't know. All right, MSI Pro. That was a good question though. No one has asked anything about X3D. You're the first to ask about X3D. Okay, this Pro. I think this is Pro Series. Yeah, the Pro Series. I don't like how their Pro Series is lacking. I think maybe they're supposed to have a heatsink for these two M.2s down here. I don't know why they're like left like that. I don't think that's how it's supposed to look. MSI did do some pretty good things on the new boards though. First of all, they added the quick disconnect. You can see the quick disconnect button here on the Tomahawk. And they also have this like nub that you move to get the SSD locked in place. So there's no more screws. There's no plastic clips that can break. You know, it's all metal now. So I feel like MSI, they've got some pretty good newer design language. Not necessarily the look of the boards. They're bringing back that yellow on black. And for those that are not familiar with MSI's history, MSI, their highest end godlike, well, before they had godlike, they used to have their overclocking boards. They used to be called M Power and X Power. Those were their highest end boards that would compete against Asus's Crosshair line, for those that are curious. The M.2 toggle was cool, yeah. They didn't really show much though in general. Like they showed the Cam 2 thing. In fact, let's look that up. Okay, Kingston Fury has a Cam 2 module. I can see this working, except I don't feel like this is enough memory. You know what I mean? Like if you can get a 128 gig, if you can get 128 gigs on this, on a single stick of this, then that's great. Then I'll buy into this. But until the density is that high, I don't see this like replacing the standard DIMM slots. So right now they're doing 2x24. So you've got dual channel built in to this somehow. But 48 gigs of RAM, to me, that's only good for like a 7800X 3D. You know what I'm saying? Well, yeah, that's not good enough for like a 16 core. You could run that on a 12 core, right? Yeah, you could run that on a 12 core. So like a Ryzen 9 9900X with this Cam 2 2x24, that would be good. That would work on like up to a Ryzen 9, but a Ryzen like a 12 core Ryzen 9, but a 16 core Ryzen 9 doesn't. This is not enough RAM. It's undersized, but it'll work. I mean, it'll work. If you're just playing games, it's fine. But if you're doing more than games, like, nah, it's not gonna work. See, but that's what it looks like. See, I feel like this only really works on back to front based motherboards, because how are you gonna put like more than one of these? You see what I'm saying? The 24 pin has to be moved to the back, which they did. So you could fit a second one here. But I feel like Cam 2 makes way more sense in laptops because it sits parallel to the main board. You'd go 64 gigabyte minimum regardless. Yeah, that's the minimum for a 16 core CPU. 48 gigs is the minimum for a 12 core CPU. If we're using the logic of how to build balanced systems. Yeah, my laptop is on 32 gigs. DDR5 4800. There it is right there. Did Gigabyte even show their stuff? No, they didn't. So who have we not looked at? Oh, BioStar? BioStar unveiled what looks like a reskin of the Valkyrie X670E, but now it's the Valkyrie X870E. You know the thing that I like about BioStar? They're like the one brand that actually showed a flagship board that has more than 2 of the X16 slots. Now, I know they're not all wired for X16, because for that you need to go to Threadripper. But your top one is X16. Your second one is probably an X8 split from your top one. And the bottom one is probably an X4. So that's actually very good. Like, this is... The Valkyrie, the BioStar board is actually one of the better motherboards that was shown off. And you can see it's really good. They have the DisplayPort HDMI at the top. They have the BIOS flashback. They have a lot of USB Type A. They've got 8 of those. And then they got your USB 4, dual USB 4, because it's mandatory. And then they got, I'm hoping that's Wi-Fi 7. I assume that's Wi-Fi 7. And then here's another thing. BioStar is one of the few motherboard manufacturers that still gives you, in addition to SPDIF optical audio with the Toslink cables, they're still giving you the full 5.1 channel analog audio. This is something that you don't see on a lot of modern motherboards. Most motherboards now, they do allow 5.1, but it's weird. They do it through a line out, and then you have to have a DAC or something that can take that line out and then split all those different audio channels into a 5.1 system. So you still can do it on a motherboard that doesn't have these, but it's more of a weird way to do it. Linux web server you're setting up for your current projects. Interesting. What are you using for the web server? The Linux web server, like hardware wise. Oh, are you just using it on like your 5700X? Well, I agree with you though. Like I mean, I agree with you. Even though I'm telling people, like balanced build, it's 4 gigs times the number of cores. I personally, back when I was running Zen 3, 3 years ago, when was I running? Like 3 years ago, I was running 64 gigs of RAM, DDR4, on my X570 Crosshair Hero, with a 5800X. So yeah, I mean, I'll oversize the RAM, but I'm just telling people like the minimum numbers. Virtual machine. Oh, okay. But yeah, you know what? What's weird about this was like Gigabyte didn't really. Was Gigabyte even? Has anybody even shown anything from Gigabyte? That's the one company that I didn't see any content on. Now that I think about it, I saw MSI, we saw Asus, we saw a lot of ASRock at the beginning of the show. BioStar has a motherboard. What's up with Gigabyte? There's like no content on Gigabyte. I don't know. They were there, but I don't know why no one's done any videos on them. I guess they didn't sponsor anybody. I know Asus sponsored a bunch of the YouTubers that went over from the States over to Taiwan. I don't think Gigabyte sponsored anybody, so maybe that's why. There'll probably be videos on them at some point, but they were like lower priority because they probably didn't sponsor anybody. Literal zero. I mean, they're there. Gigabyte is a Taiwanese company. Stuttering issues? No, if your RAM is having like if your system RAM is full, you're going to have to run page file. Now the thing is, most people are probably running their page file off of an NVMe drive, so they wouldn't really notice a problem. But if you're maxing out your system RAM and it's having to use the page file to dump things on there, yeah, you will notice stutters in games. You will. Doesn't matter what GPU you're using. Yeah, for you, it's never full, but that's not saying that someone else can't have that problem. I mean, you guys have seen me stream, like, back when I was streaming, like, Hogwarts Legacy, people were asking me, like, what your computer's at, like, 24 gigs of RAM when streaming, like, Hogwarts Legacy. It depends on what you do, though, right? Like, what is actually, like, what's using the CPU? It's gonna come down to a lot of things. Well, that's because you're never running out of VRAM. Okay, what if you're using a 2060 with 16 gigs of system RAM and you try to play like Cyberpunk or one of those games at 1440p? Then what's gonna happen? I mean, there's lots of reasons. Even if you lower the graphics settings, it's probably going to run out of system resources at some point. See? Because I remember, you didn't answer the question. That's not what I said. I didn't say 2080 Ti. I said 2060. Or, okay, let's change it. 980 Ti. 980 Ti, 16 gigs of RAM, Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p. See? It's gonna stutter. It's gonna stutter, dude. 980 Ti is a 6GB GPU. You have 16 gigs of RAM, and you're trying to run a DX12 game. Even at 1080p, it's gonna stutter. See, so the point is, the RAM, first of all, it's the VRAM, not the RAM. It's the VRAM. If the VRAM runs out, the game has to start using system RAM. And then if the system RAM runs out, because there's other background tasks. So imagine this scenario. Hold on, let's imagine this scenario. You have never had issues. But we're not talking about you. We're talking about scenarios where this can happen. What if we're playing the game? What if we're playing Cyberpunk 2077? No, not Cyberpunk. Let's use a different game. Far Cry 6 or Avatar or one of those like Frostbite, not Frostbite. What is it? Is it the Snowball engine? Snowball engine? Whatever the engine is that the Ubisoft people use. We're saying 1080p, Avatar. The game is Avatar, Mists of Pandora, 1080p, 980 Ti, 16 gigs of system RAM. Now try to stream the game. Try to stream the game at 1080p, 60, and see what happens. Oh, and we didn't talk about the CPU. Oh, and the CPU is a 5600X. 5600X, 6-core, 12-thread. We have 16 gigs of system RAM. We have a 6GB GPU. And we're trying to stream the game at the same time, and we're playing Avatar, a DX12 game. So, there you go. I'll tell you right now, that setup that I just described, that will stutter. That will stutter. It's an NVIDIA GPU. It will stutter. And that use case that I described will use more than 16 gigabytes of system RAM. And the VRAM will run out. Even though it's NVIDIA. Yeah, that's fine, but remember, you're one person. We're talking about, like, an entire array of vast amounts of scenarios that can happen. So that scenario that I described, that scenario has happened to a lot of people. I can tell you right now, you know how I know that? There's people I know that have that kind of setup. And guess what? They're stuttering. And they're using an NVIDIA GPU, and they're stuttering. And they don't understand why. And I tell them it's because their hardware is too old, and it just doesn't have, they just don't have enough system resources to do that. So, I mean, I could take any random modern game that's come out in the past 2 years and pick any like 5+ year old GPU. It could be anything from like a mid-range to a higher end GPU. Maximum VRAM, no more than 8 gigs of VRAM. And system RAM is like 16 gigs of system RAM. And the CPU could be anything from like a 5600X to an older like quad-core CPU. And we can create these scenarios, these where people can run into stutter due to system resource problems. I mean, the fact that when Hogwarts Legacy first came out, there were a ton of people complaining of stuttering. And guess what? They were all on NVIDIA GPUs because the NVIDIA GPUs they were using had anywhere from 2 to 6 gigs of VRAM. 2 to 6 gigs of VRAM. And they were only trying to play Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p resolution. And they were having stuttering issues. And the CPUs weren't even that old. The CPUs were, you know, like, what, like a Zen 2, like a 3600 or a 3600X or whatever. Matt saying you had 8 gigs of VRAM wasn't enough VRAM either. Yeah, see? So, I mean, like, that's the most recent one that I can think of. But I've had people come to me saying, like, they can't, like, Helldivers 2 is stuttering. And every time I just, it's like, okay, well, what are your system specs? Okay, this CPU is 7 years old. Okay, what's the GPU? Oh, great, yeah, the GPU, that's 9 years old. The graphics card's 9 years old, and the CPU's 7 years old, and you're trying to play the game at 1440p. What are you doing? You know, like, that's, you can't, like, what am I supposed to do, man? All I can say is, like, you need to upgrade. Or run the game at, like, 720p or something, or turn all the settings on the lowest at 1080p, and you'll probably get, like, 45 frames per second. It'll probably run like Baldur's Gate 3 on the Snapdragon Elite X. And it's using like way more power too. Yeah, 24 gigs of RAM. So most likely, you'll probably be going with like 32 gigs of RAM. For that, I would probably say 32 gigs. Because, I mean, you could do 24 gigs of RAM, but realistically, 32 gigs is going to get you dual channel, and that's way easier. It's a better setup too, to go 32 gigs. You personally believe people overpay on RAM? Yeah, most people, well, I don't know about that. Maybe. It depends on the people in your area. Most people that I know that just play games on their computer, they're running 32 gigs of RAM. I don't know a lot of people that use more than 32 gigs of RAM. Like me personally, most people that I know that have a desktop PC, they only have 32 gigs of RAM. Now, if you're a power user, if you're going to be doing anything with virtualization, then you would need more. But for most people, they don't actually need more. If you're going to sit there and just play the game and do that, then yeah, 32. It depends on the game. I have seen it use more than 32, but in general, the most I've seen myself use for what you're describing, it's like 24 gigs of RAM, somewhere around there. Like it's in the 20 number. It's not in the 30 number. But yeah. But okay. So I think that pretty much covers Computex. So the key points were well, I erased all of it now. But basically, the main takeaway that I got was the industry, the technology industry, the PC industry, the mobile industry is at an inflection point where Qualcomm has entered the market, or is entering the market with a very big push aggressively into the mobile market, and they're going to try to expand. They're going to land and expand. They're going to start off in mobile because they're really strong in mobile. And then I can see them trying to get, like, ARM in general is going to try to get into data center at some point. And then what we're going to see is maybe a big push into desktop. We'll see. Someone mentioned desktop. I don't know. I think they want a piece of that pie, but at the end of the day, I don't think they see desktop as a large market, like a profitable market. Everybody talks about PC gaming is growing, but I don't think it is. I actually think that more of it is in the mobile space. I think like handhelds and laptops are where the vast majority of the PC gaming space is actually growing. I feel like the traditional desktop, even though it's where the hardcore gamers are, it's still like a much smaller percentage, globally speaking. Now, if we're talking like, you know, US, Canada, the European Union, yeah, like the desktop, the gaming platform is mostly the PC platform. Like if we're talking like AAA games, it's the desktop computer, not the laptop computer. But as soon as you go outside, like Asia, you know, like those other places where they're more limited on space and the lifestyle's different, mobile games are way more dominant. That's the reason why like laptops and tablets and all this stuff have way stronger market share and earnings potential. And I think that's where Qualcomm is focusing their efforts. And it makes sense to do that because it's more than just the gaming market. So, yeah. There was another RAM standard shown as well. Yeah, that was there, but I think the two main things of this Computex that we will remember long term was AI everything and Snapdragon X Elite's big push into mobile. Those two things. And the final thing, the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. The more you... And that's basically it. That was Computex 2024. So, all right, guys, that's it for the stream. I will be back next week. We'll be back to a more normal, structured live stream where we just kind of have like 3 or 4 news articles of the week, and we go through that one by one, and then we do viewer discussions, kind of like we did in this one toward the end. So that's it for this one. I will catch you guys next week on Tech Thursdays, and I'll see you guys then. Take care.